My name is Alison Pokrzywinski. I'm the product development manager with Nuseed out of Devil's Lake, North Dakota, and I'm also your moderator for today. There are several Nuseed people here today in the room. We all have matching shirts on. So if you want to engage in conversation or just have any questions about today's events, just go ahead and seek any of us out. Now, this year's Sunflower University event revolves around everything to do with planting and the planting time frame. Everything from below ground insects to the actual planting of the seed. Now, this is our second year of having a, quote, hybrid meeting. So that means that there's some people online and there's also the in-person portion. For the online group, we have over 400 people that are joining us remotely today, many of which are from the heart of the sunflower country, Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota. But we also have some outreach areas within the US, such as Texas. There's also people joining us from all over the world. There's people registered from Switzerland, South Africa, and South America. And I would especially like to give a shout out to our friends to the north in Canada. They have shown up in large numbers online. So large, I'm almost wondering if we need to do a Sunflower U event at some point in Canada. So thank you all for joining. Now for the in-person, thank you all for being here as well. We'll have some added breakout sessions to add to the content for this afternoon. So for those that are here in person, since this is a hybrid meeting, we don't have any breaks planned this morning. So please, if you need to use the bathroom, if you want to stand up, grab a snack, feel free to do so as need be. And just another housekeeping, if you all can make sure that your phones are on silent as well. So a few other general housekeeping, mainly for the online crowd, but each speaker will take questions at the end of the presentation. So for those that are online, we encourage you to ask a lot of questions along with the in-person group as well. But for those online, what you want to do is click the Ask button under the chat. And then there is a like button that will appear next to each question that will kind of upvote so the moderators know which are the most popular questions. So we have two Nuseed people in the back room. Trey and Justin, raise your hands. They're sitting there with their laptops. They are the moderators and the ones that are yielding those online questions, and they're here in person as well. So if something gets asked online, they'll be able to ask it in person for the presenter. And then just to return back to the chat, you just click the X in the top right corner of the question area. And you can submit questions throughout the entire presentation, and then they'll be asked at the end. For those that are certified crop consultants, there was a CEU sign up at the front. If you guys missed it, it'll be there all morning. For those that are online, at the end of all the presentations, there will be a QR code that will come up that you'll just be able to scan that using your phone. And if there are any issues on that, then just reply back to Nuseed on the webinar email, and we'll be able to make sure that you get your credits. So for the morning sessions, there'll be 3.5 CEUs, and then for those that are here in person, there'll be an additional 1 CEU for those breakouts we'll be having. Just a quick glance at the agenda. I think most people have seen it, but we'll be starting off the morning by looking at markets from a global level and domestic level, and then moving into some agronomics, some talks on seed weevils and insects, and then we will end the morning sessions with the actual planting of sunflowers with air seeders and planters as well. For those that are in person, we will have a lunch, and then we will do 4 breakout sessions for the afternoon. So that will really build on what the presenters talked about this morning. So before we start, there's just one quick blurb on Nuseed and who we are as a company and what we are about. So there are 5 core crops that we cover. The first one and the most obvious one, right, is sunflowers. So we have sunflower breeding locations all throughout the world, Europe, North America, and South America as well. That next is followed by our brassicas, so our omega-3 canola and our commodity canola, where we have breeding locations in Australia and North America as well. And then we have a little lesser known brassica crop that many of you have probably never heard of, called carinata. And that is a harvested non-food cover crop that's grown for renewable energy. And that's being grown in the southern United States and also South America, with current deployment programs in Australia and Europe as well. We also have sorghum breeding with Richardson Seeds in Vega, Texas, and our most recent investment is energy cane in Brazil. So all of this encompasses Nuseed with about 300 employees globally. And one of our main focuses is trying to provide value beyond yield. So not just selling a bag of seed or just having a breeding program. How can we provide that extra value to growers? And one of the ways that we do that is by having an event like Sunflower University. Sunflowers being a fairly niche crop in the US, we feel that there is added value and benefit for growers and those in the industry and retailers to help bring some of that research and things that are going on in the industry level and bring them down to be able to be talked about and discussed. Because bottom line, if you guys succeed, we succeed. And we want to keep sunflowers into the rotation here in the United States. And we hope we can all work together on that. So with that, we are going to be introducing our first speakers of the day. So joining us all the way from Serbia and Spain, we have Damien and Konstantin. Damien is the European head of sales and marketing and is a member of the senior leadership team in Europe. He has been with Nuseed for nearly 10 years, and in that time has developed the market and strategy for Europe. He has a degree in finance and an MBA from London Imperial College and has spent most of his career in pharmaceutical and biotech companies. Also joining us is Konstantin. He is the Nuseed country lead in Ukraine and has a wealth of experience as a senior business leader in sunflower seeds, coming to us from Syngenta. He has sales experience exceeding 40 million euros, together with additional broad experience across CIS countries, including the healthcare, insurance, and agriculture industries. Damien and Konstantin, thank you both so much for joining us virtually today.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear us.
Hi, everyone.
Can you hear us, Alison?
Yes.
Alison? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah, just a sense check that you can actually hear us first. Otherwise, I'll start to talk and nobody will hear what we're saying. So, thank you for inviting us today to your workshop today. Absolutely privileged for both I and Konstantin to be with you today. We wish we could be there in person, but we're many miles away. Absolutely looking forward to presenting to you today on the aspects and impacts of sunflowers on Europe and with the ongoing conflict with Russia and Ukraine. So I'm going to share a presentation with you. Let me know when you can see it.
You're good.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now, the presentation. Can you just confirm? I don't hear anything.
We can
Hello?
see it.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, today I'm going to start off by just giving a landscape of the world's sunflower areas and how we see this year globally in terms of the market for sunflowers. To the left-hand side of the screen, in the green area, you see Russia is approaching 10 million hectares this year in terms of sunflower. And we see a continued pressure for in-country production in Russia. In fact, they've come out with a statement today to say by 2028, they expect 75% of Russians' requirements for Russia to be sourced within country. So that's a massive shift for Russia. And hence, many companies and competitors are looking to produce directly in Russia. Importing into Russia is getting more and more difficult because of sanctions that Russia are putting on their own borders on imports. We also have in the yellow area Ukraine, which has mostly been impacted by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine was around about somewhere between 7 and 8 million hectares, depending on the current year. We now see that down to about 4.5 million hectares. So there's a gap of around about 3.5 to 4 million hectares from Ukraine. Now, Ukraine produced mainly to export, going into various markets. So there's a huge gap in the markets. We've been analysing the European Union and speaking to some of those governments, and there is additional incentives being advised in each of the countries to try and make sure that each of those European Union countries produce as much as they can in country for their own needs. So we are seeing some shift into the European Union, but it will nowhere near make up loss from Ukraine. So therefore, just the impact on the rest of the world, so the likes of the US, China, Argentina, and all around the world, we're hearing different countries are trying to take up the slack or the downturn from Ukraine. Where those hectares end up at the end of the day, we're not 100% sure, but we're seeing rises in each country. So the expectation is that the rest of the world will try and pick up from Ukraine. As we look at the European part of the business, so if I take Ukraine and Russia out of that equation for 1 minute, just to focus on those EU 27 countries, and 90% of what is produced in Europe is produced by 6 countries. So that opportunity and our focus at this moment in time is to help those 6 countries really increase their market and their supply to warrant and to make sure they have enough product for their own needs. Of these 6 countries you see highlighted, each one of them imports additional sunflower oil into the country. So there is a rise in each of those countries for sunflowers. Just a quick look at the technologies that are used within the markets. On the left-hand side of the screen are European or EU, sorry, it's the other way around, CIS markets on the left-hand side of the screen compared to Europe market technologies in the market. So that then there needs to be a shift in looking what technologies are able or capable to be used in countries. So this is how we will see an impact in the type of hybrids that are sold. So in CIS, there's more products in the market that don't have Express, Clearfield or Clearfield Plus. So we call those non-herbicide tolerant type hybrids. Others call them classics. So there's a bigger requirement for those type of products in that area. And when we see a shortfall of those 3.5 to 4 million hectares, those products being taken by the EU market and other markets may necessarily take different hybrids to be able to grow because they fit within those countries. So you will see a shift in the actual product. So companies like Nuseed are producing products each year to plant. We have to shift between the technologies dependent on where those increases or decreases will be in the relevant countries. Just a quick look on technologies that are available from competitors in the market and how that also impacts the markets globally, because different portfolios for our competitors enable different levels of products, and therefore there will be a shift also in market share because each of those different technologies are available at different levels in each of those companies. And some of these larger companies like Syngenta and Corteva have made bold statements when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. So Corteva, you may have heard it in the media, are withdrawing from Russia. They are currently supplying in country for one last year, but that was already in production before the war broke out. So they're currently in a sellout position. They supply Russia with roughly 1 million bags of sunflower seeds, which will no longer be supplied to Russia. So there's a big gap also in the market. And you see across all our competitors the type of products that are represented here in terms of a percentage of their portfolio. Just to give a sense of in global markets, and especially around the European markets, including Russia and Ukraine, which are the leading hybrids on the market today. So when we look at different markets, for example, the US and other areas, South America, and across other areas of Europe, there is going to be a shift in the top 20 type of products. So you will start to see some major shifts, and therefore in different markets, you're going to see a shift in which products are used. So some of these you may be familiar with, and there may be an opportunity for the likes of America and surrounding countries to be able to grow some of these and be able to export them to markets where there are shortages. So there is an opportunity and an increase in demand. The whole world needs to take up 3.5 million to 4 million hectares of current shortfall of product. This is just a split of those top 10 products again by different technologies. So the top layer is the Clearfield and Clearfield Plus. The bottom is the leading hybrids in the express markets. Again, we expect the pull in other countries for these type of products. And then just one final slide from me is what motivates a grower to purchase the type of variety. You know, the reason the top 20 hybrids are the top 20 hybrids are because they yield in high quantities. The farmers have great experience with these type of hybrids, and they have great oil content. But that shift is happening in that there is, at this moment in time, a global shortage, and there are going to be reasons for availability, how a product fits into a market. We're going to see some very big shifts in which type of product. So that choice based on yield, experience, and oil content will still play a factor, but they're not going to be the ultimate decision for the grower any longer, because you need to have a hybrid that's adaptable for the climate that you're able to grow in. I'm going to now pass you over on to Konstantin, who's going to just give you a couple of insights on how Ukraine has been impacted as a country and how that's impacting his sunflower markets and the trends around the world. Konstantin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Damien.
Okay, Konstantin.
Yes, now I see. Dear colleagues, having now conflict, as Damien mentioned, and invasion, we have significant influence on economic KPI of Ukraine, and of course on soybean area and especially sunflower area. Let's talk step by step. GDP during the period of conflict was dropped in 30% with estimation of growth like close to 0.3%. What is mean the same. Inflation level was on the level of 26.6%, and for 2023 we estimating like 28%. But this is of course depend of how situation will be developed. Total soybean area was dropped in 26% and will be the same for forecast 2023. But for sunflower area, we have a lot of different scenario. In 2022, season 2021-22, soybean area for sunflower was dropped in almost 30% to 4.7 million hectares. And there are a lot of scenario for current season from in frame 4.7 and 6.5 million hectares. We will talk about this later on. I would like to pay your attention on the right part of the slide that sunflower belt of Ukraine almost under, let's say, a result of invasion. And this make a significant influence on last year performance and influence also on estimation for this year. I would like to pay attention that on that area, eastern and southern part of Ukraine is regular battle, constant battle for whole country, regular missile and drone attack. As a consequence is blackout, in addition to economic situation. On the pictures you may see that our grower is working, having mine in the ground, having missile attack, having everything. They are trying to develop agro sector and the economy of the country. What I am proud and we are proud. As issues and challenges we have, also important that we have at this moment limited access to financing, increased logistic and production cost, and VAT refund issues. Next slide, please, Damien. Thank you. Here is, you can see a provision which done by Center of Economic Recovery. I would like to thanks to share with us this information that we have a 3 forecast for next year, optimistic and more pessimistic. More optimistic is forecast from Ukrainian Club of Agrarian Business. I would like to thank them for providing a lot of information. And this is mainly because of current decreasing of winter cereals, which will be replaced by oil crop. But there are also provision from USDA and provision also from Center of Economic Recovery, which is more careful and contain a lot of factors. It's not enough time as for now to discuss this. I would like to pay your attention only on the right down corner of the slide that provision for production of sunflower is Ukraine from 10.5 million ton. I mean sunflower grain till 13.2 million ton, having in mind that average estimated yield of approximately 2 ton per hectare. Next slide, please, Damien. Talking in more detail about oblast or area of Ukraine, which was under influence of invasion and conflict, we see in detail the development and difference between soybean area is almost 28%, as I mentioned, and more, let's say, decreased soybean area was in area of Ukraine where we had grew biggest amount of sunflower, like Zaporizhia, like Kherson, like Mykolaiv, like Donetsk, like Lugansk and Kharkiv partly. Thank you. Talking about export of sunflower grain and oil, on the left top corner you can see a monthly dynamics, which is reflecting current situation very precise. And I would like to pay attention that from the last year it was allowed to export sunflower grain. Before it was not allowed, and we had only export of sunflower oil. And there are some replacement within left down corner with MAT of by value of sunflower oil to sunflower seeds. Also significantly have been changed the way of export. If we are talking about the past, it was mainly Black Sea ports. And now we can see that sunflower grain is exporting mainly some river ports. This is southwest part of Ukraine, and also a part of automobile transport. The target country is Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, if we are talking about grain. If we are talking about oil, situation a little bit different, and thanks to grain corridor, there are opportunity to make exports through Black Sea ports, and river ports also included, and there are in total like 67% total part of export of oil. And target country, this is also India, Asian country, and Europe. Next slide, please. Thank you. Talking about top hybrids divided by technology, Clearfield is leading by Syngenta and going down, partly replacing by Clearfield Plus, leading by Pioneer and Lima Grain at this moment. Top 3 hybrids for Clearfield is keeping 45%, and top 3 hybrids for Clearfield Plus is keeping 58% from total segment. Next slide, please. Overall, in the country, still leading NHP segment with hybrids from Syngenta, Grundy, and after is Express hybrids, which is growing still, and leading by Suzuka and Pioneer. Suzuka from Syngenta and P64 LE25 by Pioneer. Top 3 hybrids keeping 41%, and top 3 hybrids respectively is keeping 29%. That's all from my side, dear colleagues. Thanks a lot for all countries worldwide who support in Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine, and thank you.
So good morning. There are a couple questions that have come in on chat, and Damien, Konstantin, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. These are for you. So the first one is from Derek, and it's around the supply chain. Talk a little bit about the supply chain between the U.S. and Europe.
Okay. So the supply of sunflowers in terms of supply chain in, are we talking production? Sorry, just a bit of...
Yes, production.
Production. Okay. So we see the main impact between the US and Europe is not really affected by the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but more the climatic changes that we see. We see in many countries ongoing drought, and we see a global trend moving production and logistics more towards areas like Hungary, Turkey, France, in terms of production. One reason is climate. Secondly is in global inflation rates and being really closer to the customer, so to try and reduce some of those impacts of the logistic increases that we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, it's noted in the question or in the comments in the chat around the challenges of it's one thing just to get it there, but the challenges that are presented not with just in time of war or conflict, But even in good times, there's challenges across the ocean. So appreciate your perspective. We've got a question that's come in from South America, from Mariano, and it's in regard to forecasting the demand of oil. And as you're planning for acres and the demand, the consumer demand for sunflower oil. And they're really asking in this question, they're really asking you to be a forecaster here, a market forecaster. Are you bullish or are you bearish on that market? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, Damien, but that is. But maybe talk about the forecasting process and the thought that goes in behind forecasting the demand for sunflower oil.
So, okay, I can be bullish here. I would say globally we wouldn't see much change if we added all the numbers together. I think globally there is a requirement or a certain demand level for sunflower. What you see is a paradigm shift and a number of factors, again, climate and the war, that will shift those requirements by country. But I expect that when you add all those numbers back together, you would still get to the same total that's in the market required today. But I just think that there's an opportunity for farmers in many countries to be able to see the option to grow sunflowers and produce, especially with the grain prices as they are today for sunflower grain and sunflower oil. You know, they're high. So I wouldn't see a shift in the total requirement, just where it's provided from.
No, excellent perspective, and I believe that's our outlook here in the U.S. is our market doesn't compare size-wise, acre-wise, but certainly the optimism around the demand and increasing consumer demand for sunflowers. We're very optimistic on that. So, Alison, we don't have anything else online, but maybe in the room, if there are some questions for our guests and our presenters, we'd be happy to address them.
Are there any questions from the room? Hold on one second, Damien and Konstantin. We have a question coming in.
Okay.
Hello, gentlemen. So
Hi.
at one time, there were still quite a few open pollinated varieties raised over there. So how do the yields that you're finding over there on the non-herbicide tolerant versus herbicide tolerant compare, and how much of that non-herbicide tolerant is still open pollinated?
Okay, so in terms of open pollinated products, we only really see a large proportion of that in Russia. And by open pollinated products, we're really talking about the confection market in Russia, which they take a black type confection. There's still quite a sizable market, and we can see that continue. It is deteriorating over time as you prove the concept of a hybrid seed and the different agronomical features that each of those have. So slowly we are seeing a penetration of the hybrid seed over the OPs. I think eventually they will phase out, but I think there's always going to be a call in the market. So, there's certain customers in the market that just want cheap seed and to be able to produce. And yes, they get lower yields. But the average yield in Russia varies from anything from around 800 kilograms per ton right up to 4 or 5 tons per hectare. So there's a wide range, but the lower yields tend to come from OPs. So hence why over time I would expect that hybrids take up most of that market. But as I said, there's always going to be a place in the market for OPs.
I think we have time for one more. This comes in from Chad, but there's been publications at Nuseed, Syngenta have suspended providing planting seed into Russia. Do you expect that to change before the planting season FY23?
I can't comment on other companies. I just see the announcement from Russia's government that they are trying to secure 75% of their requirements for sunflowers to be produced in country. That's only been announced in the last 24 hours. So companies have got a choice. They either produce in Russia or they're out of the sunflower market. There's some pretty sizable companies out there that have taken a decision not to. There are other companies that are producing in Russia. So each to their own.
Thank you, Damien.
No problem.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today from all the way across the pond.
It's a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Wish we could be there in person. So have a great day. I'm sure you've got some very exciting topics and many discussions. And I look forward to catching up on you all and see how the day pans out.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I wish you
Thank you
a
very much.
fruitful day. Thank you so much, and
Thank
hope
you.
to see all of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay, now we're going to move to a little bit more of a local level on domestic sunflower markets. I'd like to introduce Guy Christensen. He is the oilseed marketing representative for ADM's soft seed processing division and locations within North Dakota, Minnesota, and Canada. Guy is responsible for the design and promotion of oilseed and pulse production contracts that provide producers with risk management tools and crop marketing opportunities. Guy originates ingredients for 3 separate divisions of ADM and also recruits growers for exclusive programs aimed at rewarding those producers, demonstrating the best soil health management practices. Guy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison, and thank you for the invitation to be here today and to speak and to share some of the aspects that, of the markets that we're seeing. I would start out by saying that this is about the domestic market, and it's because the history of sunflowers started out as an export driven market, totally export. There was no domestic usage to speak of, some small bottle, and then over the years. We ran into competition from around the world for sunflower production, and that brought the price down to the point where we could no longer support the industry very well with competing with those. So we had to stop exporting, and we had to look for a way to develop consumption in the United States, which was the birth of Nuseed, a new sun, back just before the turn of the century. So a little bit of history there. The domestic market is our market, and I bring it up because everything that's happened with Ukraine back and forth, I get a lot of questions, or we get a lot of questions on the impact of what's happened over there, and how it's going to translate into the markets here. Okay, we're a little bit isolated, and I would say that a lot of the North American crops trade at a premium domestically, or trade at a premium to some of the global prices. So we don't go back and forth as easily as we did in the past. So on my way here, I knew I was on the right road when I saw this sign. Right? That's my favorite billboard right there. So the South Dakota has been, really the backbone of the sunflower industry from a rotation standpoint, but also from a unique way in that they've always been the bank of sunflowers. Whenever I needed to buy a couple of million pounds, I could call somebody in South Dakota and I could get it. I might not like the price, but I could get the seed, right? And so that's been critical, because there's been years where we run out of flowers, but we've always got this residual in South Dakota that's really helped us out. So over the decades, scores and scores of producers have told me that it's been sunflowers that's kept them on the farm. And it's been kind of fun to be part of that storyline over the years, and so for that, I want to thank the producers here. So let's got a few slides, presentations for us today. So I didn't watch TV. Well, I did watch. I watched LeBron James make history last night. I didn't make it to the anything else, but the state of the Sun Union, really it's where we're talking about supply and demand and how these two components how come they play together and how the market discovery comes from that. So in case you haven't flown over Enderlin recently, this is the complex that I started with. Let's see, there's a oil seed crush plant there, there's a refinery, there's a edible bean facility, and there's also a pea protein isolate facility. So there's 3 or 4 different divisions just in one complex there. So some of the things they'll talk about today, obviously we would like to review 2022, quite a year, especially for the sunflower market. The S&D that we've got, some of the components of that. Oil content, which is always a big issue with a big factor in the monetizing the sunflowers. Price review, what's happened this last year, and then also some thoughts on 2023 and the markets going forward. So the year in review. Last spring when we had the Russian invasion, we had quite a bit of talk about huge shortfalls in sunflowers, and that we're going to have a lot of the North Dakota producers pick up the slack and plant flowers for Ukraine, right? And that the opportunities were going to be really expansive. So we were kind of forecasting, 20% increase. We couldn't really survey the seed companies and get an exact number, but we were fairly comfortable with a 20% increase. Turns out the numbers were up quite a bit more than that. I'll go into that in just a bit, but we had a wet spring, which helped us get those incremental acres last year. Last year was one of those years where you could plant anything you wanted to because the markets were good across the board, but the only limitation was the weather. And so the late spring gave us an opportunity to pick up some incremental acres. And I mean, sunflowers used to be known as the catch crop, the last thing you could get in if nothing else would work. So pretty good growing conditions this year. Sunflowers, indigenous to this area, they don't like it. They don't like wet feet, and it worked out fairly well for the production side. Lack of disease, didn't see very much of that. And then we had a dry finish, which is another thing that we need to get the crop off. So it was that part of the year was good. My slide didn't move on the screen here. Just a moment. So the demand side of the market, as you can see on the bottom here, the blue lines, this is the crush over the years, right? And it's been fairly flat. What you see on the top line is the implied consumption of birdseed, which it's not really a measured number, it's kind of an implied number, the residual number. But as you can see the red line going across, that we kind of split the market up fairly evenly. The crush has been over the last few years, straight line, 50%. So we're about half of the market. Bird food the other half. So it's kind of amazing that there's that much seed that goes to feeding birds, but it is a huge factor. I'll move on. So here's a breakdown of where the acres were planted, and the planted acres, harvested acres, and the yields. And North Dakota achieved a record high yield of 1,900 pounds this last year. But at the bottom line, here we have a huge increase in acres, not a huge, 32% increase in acres. But more importantly, we had a 48% increase in production, which is a fairly big swing. Contrast that to last year, we had a 34% decline last year from the year previous to that. The USDA was projecting numbers to be up 20-25%, and at the end of the day, the final numbers came within 3% of their estimate this year, which is pretty good. It was 50,000 acre spread, but it was a fairly close on that. So North Dakota, South Dakota, you can see from this chart that is the industry, right? Acres up 32%, production up 48, like I mentioned, translates into 833 million pounds of more seed this year, which that's a fairly big chunk, right? On top of that, we had a 3% increase in the oil content. So we've got good supplies. So what does it mean? Well, we got the acres, as you can see on this chart, the acres moving up from last year. And I put this chart together because the carryout, the stocks at the end of the year, they always matter, right? And if we don't, if we're unable to utilize the crush and use up more seed this year, we're going to have a worst case scenario of a higher carryout than we've had in some years, right? Now, the absolute number maybe doesn't matter as much as it did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because we have better carrying capacity. We've got crops that are in good condition. But this is a factor. This would be you'd be described the market as comfortable right here, the buyer side. Here's a look at what came across the scale, October, November, December, and it's a distribution of how much oil came in at each different level. And surprisingly, we had almost as much over 50% as we had under 40%. This is a little skewed because some of the lower oil stuff doesn't always make it to our door, but this is a fairly good snapshot of what actually was produced this year. And this is at that 45.7 average oil. That means everything you see on the prices is discounted. You know, the flat rate of the book rate that you see on flowers is really 10%. It's actually 10% higher on a net return to the growers, right? So this is one of the higher, better performing years we've had for sunflowers. I'd like to attribute it to what I saw when I was traveling in South Dakota last August. My favorite road on the tour started here and went straight west on 34, I think it is. Sunflowers for 20, 30 miles both sides of the road. It was what a buyer loves to see, right? But what I did notice is, because maybe the wet spring, that we had the highest populations best stands I've ever seen. It was quite remarkable, and I think that was across both Dakotas. But I think the high stands led to some better oil contents. I've been buying flowers for many, many years, and this is the first time I've had dozens and dozens of people report over 3,000 pound yields. It's never happened before. So we had close to ideal situation. So 2022, it was quite a year, and of course it all started with the invasion and knowing we don't get these types of events every other year, so no one knew how to handle it, right? And maybe the market, I believe that the market has reset itself from what happened last year. And many commodities, believe it or not, are at or below prices they were a year ago today, right? Most of our memories 5, 6, 8 months back, where we kind of remember some of the prices last summer, but actually go back a full year and we're actually at or below where we were before. So last year, of course, with that 34% drop in production, supply was a big concern, and that was on the supply and demand. That was a known, and I don't think it was a surprise to anybody what was going to happen with the markets with that production reduction, right? The downside of a 34% drop in supply any given year for the crush industry is that we have to pinch off some domestic users. And we don't like doing that because it's hard to get them back if we lose them. So the wide swings in production, not something we like to see. We'd like it to be a lot more, we'd like the extremes to be less extreme. Like I mentioned earlier, the crop budgets, were positive for most crops at that time, so, planting options were wide open for people. But the perceived war impact, it seemed to linger a little too long. Once the market started to relax, come under a little bit of pressure, I still had a lot of producers call up and say, yeah, but what about Ukraine? And so the news kind of came and went in a way, and but it kind of stuck in the back of people's minds, and it really slowed people down from taking decisions to fund marketing. So price volatility that we had this last year makes marketing decisions just awful. I mean, people would call and sell one day, and the next day the market was either up or down, whether it's canola, soy, or whatever. It just gave people pause that they could never seem to hit the trigger properly. So I get the question, what's the market going to do? Well, last year the best answer was, I don't know. Can you make money? Just leave it at that, right? Because the markets where a lot of people got hurt in the markets this year. I would venture to say that everyone made at least three mistakes in marketing in 2022. So then we throw in, you get the war and post-pandemic, and then you throw in talk about inflation. Well, how's that going to, we haven't had inflation in the script for many, many years. How is that going to play into the game or into the marketing? And then the recession chatter, which is maybe a little bit on the opposite side, how is that going to play into future demand? So just some new factors to deal with. And then finally, something a little closer in the last year or so, you guys have all had problems with, getting equipment, getting things fixed, just getting things taken care of. Same thing has happened across the industry, all the different lanes, from soy crushing, cotton, canola, sun. We've had a tremendous amount of downtime across all of these different industries because when a pump breaks, there doesn't seem to be another one around, and it takes 2 weeks to get it, and so you can't make up for lost time. So the point is that this supply chain thing has really impacted the North American crush utilization. We've got the product, and it's not too often you'll have a December where soybean crush drops when there's ample supplies of soybeans, right? So this crush utilization is a big factor for all the industries. So here's something you wouldn't have thought of, but 12 months ago, urea is higher than it is today, way higher. This is a NOLA price, but $300 a ton difference from February last year. The growers that I talked to, a lot of them did some of their pricing when they got this first dip, and they thought, oh, finally, we're back to some reasonable numbers. And a lot of retailers, on the other hand, loaded up right here, and now they've got inventory that would like to move. So we're not going to be able to see, you're not going to be able to realize these lower prices right away because of just the time to work through these supplies, but we've got some retailers that are scratching their head on how to get out of this, right, and how to pedal their length. Because there is no real effective hedging mechanism for these guys on fertilizer. If they do what they think is the right thing and they put it in position for you folks, and then the market drops on them, they got problems. Soybeans, same thing. We're really back to where we were a year ago. I got a few other examples here. Look at the crude oil and natural gas. I don't think we would have thought crude oil would be lower, 4 or 5 months ago, that we'd have lower prices in crude oil with what's going on with supplies. Natural gas, that was the big surprise. I was kind of sweating bullets back in August when it was near $10 on the charts, and I was looking forward to a cold winter and heating the house. But it remarkably has come down quite a bit, which has led to the increased production of urea, other fertilizers. And it is also, the other factor on the fertilizer, they say, is that some of the other countries that normally would have the financing to buy or to be in the fertilizer market are having problems. Price index, here on the left you've got your vegetable oil, your ingredients. On the right you've got your food index. So we've seen some pullback on the inflation, which I guess that's good. So talk about volatile markets. This is a canola chart. It's the March canola futures, and there's a group that play in the market, the funds, the managed money, and they have to report their positions. So it's kind of like you can see what they're doing throughout the time. If you want to just snoop on them and just get the weekly report and find out if they're long or short, what are these guys thinking? Well, you take a look at the chart, and what actually happens is that they've been kind of getting beat up a little bit, getting short at the bottom and long at the top, short at the bottom and long at the top. The fund managers, I think they like to grab trends, and hang on to those and just feed them, right? But they've been getting whipsawed pretty good. So don't feel bad about making a marketing mistake. The pros have been messing it up all year long. I like to put a canola and sun price together next to each other, because what you'll find is that the two are the old trading places. In other words, if one gets too high or one gets too low, they have a tendency to go from divergence back to convergence. So they keep flipping. And if I went back 5-10 years, you'd see several times where the sun and the canola keep trading places as to the leader in the market. And that's because if you get this divergence that lasts too long, you get substitution in our markets. It sometimes takes 2-3 months for that to happen, but it will happen if it gets to be too pronounced. Looking at today's market, this would be most recent, right at the end here. Based on global, once again, North American versus global prices, this would suggest that the next convergence would be the canola trading closer to the sun. So we have two types of flowers out there. We've got two bids out, Ohio Lake, Nuseed. Ohio Lakes have been growing market share year after year. We started small, 10% 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and we moved up to, I would say, across all the seed companies that I've surveyed, probably 70%, plus or minus 10, doesn't really matter. Kind of gets you in the ballpark from year to year is what's getting planted, right? So, but this just kind of shows how when we first started bidding for Ohio Lake, we had a small premium, and it stayed that way for several years, right? But now it's starting to trend a little bit higher, and part of these spikes that you see on this chart are a function of trade flow. In other words, we get periods of time where we have concentrations of Ohio Lake in North Dakota versus different concentrations in South Dakota, and if the trade flow is out of one state or another, it's going to affect like the processors' interest in what do we need more of, okay? And so there's some seasonality to this as well, in that we have, when we get to towards the end of this marketing year, Q2 I should say, on sunflowers, in the summer months, we typically have a fair amount of sunflowers yet moving to South Dakota, which that's not a bad thing, but then it's a higher concentration of new sun, but if we're working on a bigger blend in the crush. So we get these gyrations, but it does really feel like the spread is moving up to another level, and it may stay there for some time. Here's the forecasted crush. Now you can see, I showed you that other chart earlier where the crush, oops. Oh, yeah. It's moving on the screen, but not on there. I'm having another problem. Oh, there it is. It's back. Okay. So here's the longer term look at the crush, domestic crush, and you can see what's forecast for this year, a big jump, and it's a jump that we need to kind of chew up the larger supplies. All right. It would be a substantial jump over the previous years. Now, this is what the USDA is forecasting for crush, about a 400 million pound increase. So if you look at the very bottom line, that was the last year, or that was 2001, 2002, and then the middle line was the oldest one. So you could see that the black line is the crush when we had a short crop, and the blue line is the crop before that. And you can see with the green line going across here, this is what is currently being forecast. So if we can achieve that, it's going to fix the supply and demand quite a bit. So new sun, I won't spend too much time on this, but the new sun, the uses haven't changed much. I mean, it's probably it's got a history of being maybe the cheaper oil of the two, and very functional and used by the chippers primarily. The high oleic sun has gone into some more of the high-end products over the years, and is becoming more and more in demand, as you can tell from some of the bids. So now I'll just look at a few more values out there. Here we've got the U.S. values of different oils, right? The primary 5 stable oils in the U.S. Corn, cotton, peanut, soy, and sun. And you can see sun had its moment in the day, right? Moment there in May, where we basically, it was almost like a no offer. So it's kind of an exaggerated chart, but as you can see, things have normalized quite a bit, and this goes through the end of October. On a world basis, now here's something that's kind of interesting, in that the folks were talking before about the Ukraine. The black line is the Black Sea, which would represent Ukrainian sun oil prices, right? And what happened was it kind of went no offer in Ukraine when the invasion hit. And then when they brokered the deal with the UN to get the trade flows going back again, all of the other buyers that had been relying on getting the supplies out of Ukraine had to go somewhere else. And that blew up all the other vegetable oil prices. So what happened after that is once they did reopen, they didn't have places to go. And so the Black Sea sun oil is now trading as the lowest price because they had to buy the markets back in again. And the previous folks had some projections on global production. It looks like it'll be down this year, primarily due to what's going to happen in Ukraine. But the trend, it's down, it's steady, but it's not going to be dramatic. Here's a little long-term picture for you. 28 years of sunflower prices. We've had a couple, three great peaks, I guess. Each one of them for a different reason. The first one was back when everything was going up, so it wasn't independent of sunflowers. The second peak was a shortfall of sunflowers that was caused by people that had stuff sold, didn't have it bought. Bird food driven, probably. And the last one here was the war. So we've had three major spikes in our sunflower history, and all of them for different reasons. Looking forward, we've got people actively booking 2023 acres. I'll go into that a little bit more. It's less than last year, but not that much. 2022 production increases are going to be the production that we have. This increase in production this year, the supply is going to allow the industry to bring more people in Q3 and Q4. In other words, get more people consuming sun oil. So it takes time for this to happen. You can't pick up the phone overnight and say, hey, I got 10 cars of oil, where do you want it, right? It takes a long time to get this fashioned in. So, but the supply that's out there now gives some comfort to the trade that we can expand the usage, okay? Last year's acres were up quite a bit, like I said, 34%, but we did press some rotations due to the late spring. So that's going to be a factor. So talking to growers, sunflower outlook unchanged with many and lower with some. Act to God contracts still represent the bulk of the contracting that we do forward. And we still have the spring battle. I still have quite a few growers talking about there's still a story coming, right? Is there going to be a seasonal rally in April, May like we typically see? And given the dynamics of the market, I don't think it'll be as pronounced. But the veg oil markets in general are going to be well supported because what just happened, and you guys have all heard about the renewable fuels programs and mandates and whatnot that are going on. What just happened last month, or November, December, or December, January, is that the production of renewable diesel exceeded the production of biodiesel, right? And so these plants that are coming online and whatnot, they're starting to make a difference, and so that's going to be underlying support for all veg oils. If we're building a plant in Spiritwood, North Dakota, with 100% of the soybean oil going out of that is going to renewable diesel. So there's a lot of charts on the expansion. If they tell you it's going up 100 million tons, it's probably going to be 50, but it's still going in that direction. I talked about contracting, and this is kind of just an illustration of the interest in new crop contracting for next year. A lot of guys have had good experience the last couple of years, so we have what I would call a little bit of production momentum or inertia, and people like it in the rotation. So nearby prices obviously are under pressure. We had huge selling this year with the big crop, and we also had a very storable crop. It was quite dry, too dry in some cases, but so there was a lot of producers that they're comfortable holding into the spring, into the early summer with their flowers because they're in very storable condition and they're better facilities, right? The outside markets have been holding up well, and logistics, again, is going to be a challenge that we've got to get past. I was at the KMOT show up in Minot last 2 weeks ago, and I asked all the people that I talked to if they wanted a job, because I need some help. Nobody took me up. So, it's the supply chain plus it's the workers. It's pretty tough. You guys experience the same thing, I'm sure. The bird feed markets, the competition for us, they're expected to, it sounds like their usage is fine, but they're probably going to pivot from booking the forward or locking in the forward positions, and they'll probably stay maybe in closer by, nearby positions. Again, they're probably comfortable with what they see for supplies. Here's something that's happened most recently. So here's 3 different price structures that we were displaying. The first one was, what did the market look like in December? The green line, the nearby position all the way out into February of next year. You can see the lines, there's a carry involved, but it's fairly flat. Then you fast forward a month later to January, and you see the blue line, and the nearby bids are obviously sinking lower, but we're still seeing some strength in the deferred markets. And then we go to carry market 3.0, which is this week, and you can see that it's even gotten more dramatic. So, but I think the point here is that the demand still remains in some of these deferred positions for marketing. And I think the current numbers that are out there, they're very close or better than last year's numbers at this time. So we've got bid sheets that go out every day. This is an example of that. I think I've run out of time, so if there's any questions.
You used to have a buying facility down in Goodland, Kansas. But, I mean, you see that market back?
Well, I was part of the.
Can you repeat the question, Guy?
Yeah, he asked about the Goodland plant that ADM used to have in Good, and actually I was part of the team that went down and suggested to the previous owners that we build a plant in Kansas. We went down there and surveyed the growers, and we could see that at that time it was wheat fallow, and there was 5 million acres within a few hundred miles of wheat fallow. There was a lot of potential. We never really got the plant up to full capacity, and because sunflowers in that part of the world were treated more as a second crop after winter wheat and not a primary crop. So we never really knew until the winter wheat was off if there was going to be any acres go in, and if it was dry, then it wouldn't happen, right? So it didn't work. We even ran, I can remember 3 years in a row where the prices in Goodland were elevated to the prices of North Dakota. It still didn't make a difference.
Are there, right there?
When am I not going to have a question? So, Guy, do you think that this trend that you saw with the oil content this year or what you saw with the higher oil content this year, is this a trend or was this a blip, do you think?
I think I attribute most of it to a trend. What I thought I saw in western South Dakota, for example, or what I've heard and I've talked to some people, is that there's better equipment than there was 10 years ago. There's less solid seeding, more planting. And I think that's going to drive the oil content when you get better placement and you don't have these monster heads out in the middle of the field. And, the average person is going to think, big head, that's going to be great. Actually, that's going to be your lowest oil seed, right? You want consistent small. I think you folks know that, but.
So then to follow up on that, so if this is a trend and we're continuing on this line and, kind of bounce around a little bit in supply and harvest, but our yields are going up too, would that ever cause you guys to come out with a lower cash bid in anticipation that you're going to pay more of it on the premium side?
That's never been discussed.
Okay.
No. It's you could probably measure it like against canola, which there is no premium. But some parts of the state have 45 oil and some parts of the states have 38 oil, but they all get one price, right? So what happens in canola is not what happens in wheat. It's not what happens in sunflowers. But it's a prorate. It's a value proposition. We like the high oil. We prefer high oil sunflowers.
And then one last question, just kind of follow up on that. So this year we had where we basically had no rain, like end of July through basically the whole month of August into the first part of September. So, which was great on the disease front and the yield front. But I'm just wondering, when we have seasons like that versus years where we get August rains and that, do you see it impact the fatty acid profile, especially on oleic content? And what have you noticed as the rain pattern shifts there during that grain fill period?
So once you get to, say, middle of August or late August, the fatty acid profile, that's already been set. That's one of the first things that's established. So your oleic, so we don't see the dryness affecting the oleic necessarily, right? The late season dryness definitely affects the oil, because if you want a 45, 50% oil, you got to finish well. You can't starve it to death as it's trying to finish out.
Are there any other questions?
We have nothing online.
Okay. Nope. There's one more guy.
Okay.
ADM and Herald stopped offering a bid. When do you expect that bid to come back?
I would think, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. But it should be, we went into suspended animation, if you will, with the crush plants. We went to contract only with our receiving because the movement was so heavy. You've got to do something, right? First thing we did is we said no more spot market. Second thing we did was said contract only. And same thing, when we did that, every other market got run over. So it just takes time to work through get caught up. But I can't speak for that facility. Okay?
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you all. If you got any questions, I'll be around.
Next, we'd like to introduce Kyle Okke. Kyle was raised on a produce farm in Minnesota, where he started his passion for agriculture. He received a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy from the University of Minnesota Crookston, with an emphasis in crop production. His career has taken him from a retail agronomist to regional agronomist with Winfield United, and now his own consulting business, Agile Agronomy, working with farm and retail clients. In addition, he co-hosts a podcast called Agronomist Happy Hour, sharing a craft beer over happy hour, talking about the one thing they are passionate about, agronomy. And if you guys have never listened to the podcast, I would like to give a little plug for it. It is highly entertaining, and you also learn a lot. So thank you for doing that, Kyle.
So thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to change pace and topics and talk agronomy, but thanks, Alison, for the plug on the podcast and the craft beer thing. So I do have some custom labeled beer from an event that we held last week. So anyone has heard of Agronomy on Ice or Hatter Chatter and all that was going on the last couple months, anyone that asked questions, flag me down afterwards. I'll get you a 6-pack of beer. So a little incentive for you guys to ask some stuff. I've got some stuff. Got 3 cases. I don't want to leave with any of it. I want to leave it here with you guys. So anyways, topic-wise, anyone dealing with pH, or you see your soil tests, or you have an agronomist working with you, or you are the agronomist, and you're wondering about, why are my pH levels below 6? Is this affecting my production? What's going on? So it's certainly getting talked about more and more as time goes. I see it on soil tests more and more. And I just want to share with you my experiences and what I'm seeing, and really address the question, is this pH thing an issue? And if it is, it might be different from everyone. So I just want to talk about the impacts of acid soil. So the whole next 30 minutes while we talk, I want to break this down 3 ways. Why we're here on an acid soil environment, and then what are the fertility impacts, and then mostly where I want to focus on is what are the other things that are being impacted, and things I want you guys to think about. And namely, it's on herbicide control, which we rely a ton on residual herbicides in sunflower production. So I think this is going to be important for everybody. But it all starts with this picture. So this is courtesy of Ryan Beto in Dickinson, North Dakota at the our Dickinson NDSU Research Experiment Station. And they have been doing a lot of diligent work looking at this acid soil pH thing and how it affects production for us in all crops. But just south of town, a farmer brought to him, goes, I have some real problem areas in a few of my sunflower fields. And so he actually went out and got above in the air and kind of identified where those problem areas are. And if you look here and you can see kind of on either side of that dotted line, there's a definite difference in stand. And actually this is a pretty high resolution. If I could pinch and zoom on this, you'd actually see where there's a bunch of kochia plants and green foxtail down here. And anyways, all the difference is a 4.8 pH to a 5.1 pH. So it's not that big of a difference, but it's still on the acid pH side of things. And so we're just trying to start to peel back the layers of why is this affecting certain areas and not others? If you would look at a lot of conventional soil science information, you would say even a 5.1 pH should be affecting all crop production. But we see in a lot of circumstances that's not the issue. Not yet, anyways. So just looking at the scope of things, this comes from AgVise Labs. They do a survey every year. They're the ones that I send all my soil samples to, and they always kind of complete an analysis of all the samples that come in, and just looking at the areas that have pHs below 6. And the area where I live, is in Dickinson, North Dakota. And we see roughly close to that, I would say 1/5 of our acres see an acid soil pH environment. But a lot of our soil sampling is done on a whole field basis. We take composite soil samples. Now we're seeing more and more precision soil sampling, like zone soil samples for the most part. Some people do grids, but I would say overwhelmingly, if it's in precision sampling, it's by zones. And I'll show you the differences that we're starting to see by zones. So that number seems low, but if you start zone sampling, I would argue that that number goes up really fast. So how did we get here? How did we get here on this acid pH thing? So at least in our area and in my area in southwest North Dakota, and I want to say it's the same, I've seen this a lot of places. If you're no-tilling or minimum tillage, every year as we've gone, like let's just look at the past 30 years. The past 30 years we've been pretty strict no-till in southwestern North Dakota. So we have a lot of surface applied nitrogen, got a lot of banded nitrogen at the top, and you're not working up any soil. So if we start to actually break down and look at the different depths, we're seeing this stratified pH where 0 to 6 could be anywhere from 4 to 6 pH, and then it gets down to 7 and 8 in your subsoil. But if you start breaking it down more, you actually see in kind of that seeding layer or that fertility layer where things are being applied, we actually see lower pHs yet. And it actually goes from this real low pH and then just starts increasing as you go deeper into the soil. And a lot of that is because either we're surface applying nitrogen fertilizer, which we have to produce a crop, or we're banding it right in our seed row. And so it's right in that top 3 inches of soil where we're concentrating a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. And all of our nitrogen fertilizers have ammonium in some way or another And in a net way, it actually is displacing cations, namely calcium, which would create the high pH, and it starts to displace things. So for anyone that is a soil scientist or knows us at a higher level, I apologize because I'm going to oversimplify a lot of this soil science talk, but all nitrogen fertilizer does acidify soil to some level. So here's maybe a better way to explain what does this really mean. If I can get things to advance for you guys. Sorry, I'm bogging down your guys' computer like Guy was. Whenever it does come back, what's happening when you're surface applying this nitrogen, and it's going to displace calcium. So think of this. How many of you guys get or heard of cation exchange capacity, base saturation? Do you get it on your soil samples? Or at least you're aware of it. I think a lot of us do. I hopefully want to give you a better understanding what this means, and then this can help explain what's actually happening with acidification. So if you just look at your nutrient holding capacity in your CEC, so the cation exchange, think of it like the table you're sitting at. Each nutrient representing a chair at the table. So I'm going to use a CEC of 10 because it's a really easy number to do the math on. So you've got 10 seats at the table. Each seat is going to represent a different positively charged nutrient that's in the soil. A typical soil is going to be dominantly calcium on those exchange sites, and then it's going to have some magnesium, it'll have potassium, it'll have sodium, and then it'll have hydrogen and some other micronutrients and all that. So if you look at your CEC is just the places at the table. When you start to look at base saturation, that's just how many seats are at the table. So if 7 seats at the table are taken up by calcium, there you had a 70% base saturation. Same thing with magnesium taking up 2 seats. Potassium usually just only takes up a portion of a seat. And then sodium, which we generally don't like to see, does have a part of a seat at the table. And then that rest of the percentage, if you're doing the math, makes up a lot of your smaller micronutrients and things that are in a lot less concentration. So here's the idea behind this. You have your cation exchange capacity, you have your holding capacity, there's a lot of calcium that are on those exchange sites. You introduce ammonium fertilizer. So almost all your nitrogen sources start as ammonium before it converts to something else. What'll happen is that ammonium will temporarily displace the calcium off that exchange site. And then the plant and the soil microbes and all that does work, and they convert that nitrogen to something else. But what'll actually happen over time is as you're applying nitrogen and you're starting to exchange on those exchange sites, you're actually bumping a lot of those cations, the calcium, off those exchange sites, and the water will start to push it down in the soil profile. And so then if I go to rewind and you look at, or you just think about all your soil samples, if you see the 2-level pHs, because a lot of us are taking down to 24-inch soil samples, right? So that 0 to 6 always has a lower pH than that 6 to 24-inch. And I'm over-exaggerating this. This is something that's taken 30-some years' time to happen, not 3 years' time. But I'm just trying to illustrate a point. So you're just knocking off a lot of what makes it a high pH, and it's going deeper into the soil profile. So hopefully if you're at this point and I get it, you're like, okay, what does it mean? I go back to this picture. You know, there's this gradient here. So if you look at that, pH is like this giant master switch. So it wants to be in this balance somewhere between 6 and 7 pH. And and especially 7 considering to be the neutral point, if you start to fall below that or go above that, availability of certain nutrients go up and certain nutrients go down and start to tie up. There's 16 essential soil nutrients, and arguably I guess there's like some super micro ones that you could add to that list. to make it bigger, but there's interactions that happen with all these nutrients depending on pH. If it's neutral, things like to play nice. If things become acidic, what happens is aluminum first becomes extremely soluble, and that's not good at all for any plants. So aluminum toxicity, so if you see, it's down here, aluminum, that just ramps up exponentially as the pH starts to drop. Aluminum becomes more and more soluble, and that ties up not only fertilizers, so phosphate would be the first one. You tie up phosphate extremely fast with aluminum, but it's also toxic to plant roots, so you don't get root hairs, those roots don't grow out, and you get trouble just with exploratory roots to pull in nutrients. So it's a huge problem in what happens, but it is a steep line that happens, just like what you're seeing here. But there's more to it. There's more variability. So the pH can change solubility rather quickly. But one thing we don't measure in the soil, which we're starting to see more, and this is courtesy of Ryan Beto that's starting to notice and see this, is that aluminum varies in the soils too. So you get this combination of lowering pH, and then you see varying aluminum, you could see some production issues. So this is becoming a real issue. But this isn't something new. This is something that's looked at all over the place, and I know a lot of us think like, yeah, this is a Midwest corn and soybean thing where they do a lot of conventional tillage and they have 40 inches annual precip. That's not Western South Dakota. That's not Western North Dakota. You know, that doesn't apply to us. And I would agree that it's hard for us we can pull some things that they do with the liming stuff that makes sense. But for us in a no-till environment, we're not going to work the ground. We don't get enough rain to make that make sense. And if you look, where's our nearest lime source? We don't have lime quarries. We don't have limestone quarries anywhere close to us. In North Dakota, we have maybe in Western, well, we did recently. That'll be kind of gone through soon, but we had a sugar beet plant in Sidney, Montana that was semi-close to us in Western North Dakota where we could work through this issue. They just announced they're closing their doors in April, so that pile will be gone before we know it too. So this is an expensive thing to fix for us. So that's the problem. But there are other states. So here's some work just out of Oklahoma State University. Brian Arnell does a lot of work with this. No-till environments. Montana State does a lot with their pH in no-till environments. And just a combination of their work and reading through that would suggest that at about like that 5 pH on sunflowers is where things that's where the cliff starts to happen. And so it's a lot lower than I think a lot of literature would suggest for just crops in general. But there's probably other things that are going on to cause that. So, maybe we have more buffer than we think. But eventually, once you drop off that cliff, there's nothing that's going to save us from production except for lime. But I'm just pointing this out. And so back to the precision thing, pH is extremely variable. So I'm just going to share a few maps from fields that I zone sample. So there's pH variability that, like here is probably one of the more acidic fields I have, where you're 5.1 pH to 5.9. So there's about roughly 1 point in pH variability. I've got other fields that range anywhere from 8 pH down to 6 pH. Now, I don't think a 6.4 pH in my low ground is going to affect any production issues as far as nutrient uptake, all that. I think I'm still in the sweet zone on that. But I have up to 8 pH in areas on all my hilltops. I've got limey outcrop areas, all that, same with fields like this. So there is variability across the field. And so what I'm trying to get across is when you have a composite soil sample taken, one soil sample that represents the whole field, you might average out a lot of this and go, oh, it's not so bad. But if you start zone sampling, you start uncovering some of these things, and it might explain what you see across the field. Just one other thing to add. So if we're talking about pH going up and down is like a master switch, changes solubility of things, aluminum toxicity, variability of pH. Crop varieties also make a difference on how they respond to pH. And so there's work in multiple states. Washington's one, Montana's another. This is on wheat, it's not sunflowers, but I want to point this out is that wheat makes up a lot more acres than sunflowers, and so a lot of the university work is focused on wheat. There are varietal differences on how that they've, have the trialing, have the work to show there are huge varietal differences on how wheat varieties will perform on different pHs. If you go to Oklahoma, they can prove it on winter canola varieties. I'm sure the same exact thing counts on sunflowers, except that sunflowers are 1.7 million acres in the whole US, and 1 million of that is in the Dakotas, compared to the 50 some million acres of wheat that exists. So you can see where the focus has been on that. But what I'm trying to get at is that as a farmer, as a retailer, as a consultant, as somebody that's paying attention to these things, this is just a good thing to watch for, to try to pay attention to extra details. Do you have a pH issue? Do you see it in your soil samples? And do you notice there's certain hybrids that perform better than others? I don't know how big of a deal sunflower hybrid would make on that, but it's something to pay attention to. So things get complicated fast. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of things going on. What I primarily want to focus on is the weed control aspect of it. How does pH affect weed control? I think this is something that everyone in the room can realize is a major factor in your production for sunflowers. So I'm just going to talk about the main weed issues that I see in Southwest North Dakota. I want to assume that they're probably pretty similar to South Dakota, and it's kochia and green foxtail. I mean, are there head nods that, yeah, that's probably what you deal with most in flowers, or is there other weeds that you guys deal with? Mare's tail's been a problem for us too, some. That's a growing issue. And I'd imagine as you go east, water hemp is becoming a major issue. But I want to just bring this up again. So you've been seeing that picture of the sunflower stand where it goes from this nice full canopy stand to a thin stand, and the pH change. So this is some more Oklahoma State University work where you're seeing differences in canopy from pH levels. And so, like I said, that pH of 5 is kind of where that cliff starts to go, where it starts to thin out canopy. And that pH of 5 is where you start to see a 10% decrease in yield. You start to see the canopy open up and things drop off. But you think, okay, so just one major physical aspect right there. You're losing canopy. You get light going through the sunflower canopy. You've got more opportunity for weeds to germinate. So there's just one check right here why pH is an issue as far as weed control goes. I want to share fields that I personally deal with. You can see there's kind of a dividing line here where you have a good stand versus a thin stand. So this is sunflowers from this past year. This ground was brand new to one of the farmers I work with here a couple of years ago. The guy that had it before had it pieced into a lot of little, I'd call it like summer fallow, chem fallow strips. And he had a lot of CRP and grass planted. He had a lot of cattle, and this is an entire section field. And so some of it's behind this waterway. But he had a lot of this in grassway around all this creek, and all of it was broke out and planted into flowers after year 2 of production. And this is what we noticed when the sunflowers were in that field, was that everywhere where there was old CRP, we have a really good stand. And if you looked at the pH levels there, they were higher. We went into the main production where it was wheat on wheat on wheat on wheat on wheat for as long as he could remember before he purchased it, because he's been farming next to this field his whole career. And so they're seeing some kind of acidified or stratified, pH, and we're seeing a thinner sunflower stand. So that's affecting weed control. But soil pH is also affecting residual herbicides. And so how many people are using Spartan Charge or Blanket or some generic sulfentrazone? I mean, that everyone's raising their hands here, right? I mean, this is a staple residual herbicide that we use for sunflowers. Under high pH, the solubility. So this is something that's affected by pH chemically. The higher the pH of a water solution or the soil water, which is affected by the soil pH, is going to make the solubility higher, and it's going to make weed efficacy higher, and it's also going to burn the crap out of your sunflowers higher. So you have to be very aware of the rate you use, because you could cause a lot of injury to sunflowers. But the opposite happens when the pH lowers. So your solubility decreases, it actually binds tighter to the soil, and you have less efficacy. And so where I live in southwestern North Dakota, I deal with guys that are using 5 and 6 ounce rates that don't work that great on kochia. Matter of fact, last year, we started to suspect that we might see resistance, where we had 5 ounce rates of Spartan going out, getting a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of rain within a week, and we had that field spotless, clean, and kochia's growing through it. We're going, we got a problem. And so, is it possible to see, because of this whole pH idea, is it possible to see variable control of weeds on a field when we're applying one single rate of herbicide across the whole field? In a situation like this, majority of us, and everyone I work with, and myself included, the last thing you want to see is burning all your hilltops, right? It's not your highest yielding areas, but it contributes to yield. And so a lot of the times we're kind of governing a herbicide rate based on the hilltops where it's really high pH because we're burning there. But are we doing justice for weed control in these areas? And over the years, I've actually noticed some of our better ground across fields is where we have our bigger weed issues. So this is just one piece of the weed control puzzle, I think, that's contributing to we're seeing less control on kochia and in some cases green foxtail. So this is where things get maybe a little more real for us in North Dakota, and I'm sure it is no different in South Dakota. You guys are seeing it too. But we're getting more and more samples coming in from all the Group 14 PPOs. So if it's carfentrazone, AIM, if it's saflufenicil, Sharpen, we're seeing Spartan in some circumstances too, where it is not controlling like it has. And so here's resistance screening that is going as we speak with our Ag Experiment Station in Minot with Brian Jenks. I mean, this is all fresh and happening right now. He's pulling samples from this season. He's going through his protocols and screening processes. And this is just carfentrazone AIM at the 1 and 2 ounce rates. And I think a lot of us in this room would look at this and go, well, yeah, AIM hasn't worked in a lot of years for us. We haven't gotten activity out of this, and we would maybe pass this off as a useless herbicide. But here you have a susceptible check, the high rate, the low rate, and you have these different locations that just blow right through it. If you go to further east, or you go further north, if there's a lot of Canadians on this call, they would probably, some would argue with me and say, carfentrazone's a pretty good active ingredient for us. But there's just differences in populations and areas. Same thing with saflufenicil, Sharpen, so heat in Canada. We're seeing the same thing happen where it's starting to show resistance to those herbicides. Spartan is next on the docket, or the authority brands, the sulfentrazone, and that work's just not done yet. It's in process, but all of those locations are Western North Dakota, where we have higher percentages of lower pH soils. So I'm starting to think this is more than a coincidence where these samples are coming in from those areas. So let's go back to the Spartan Charge label. They actually have a pretty handy dandy flow chart when it comes to how you use your residual in sunflowers and just about every other crop. Spartan is probably one of the best ones out there as far as explaining it. It has a flow chart based on organic matter, based on soil texture, and especially on the bottom. See this pH thing? You use higher rates if your soil pH below, use the higher rate in the spectrum. If your pH falls below 7, you go to the lowest rate if it goes above 7. So within the product label itself, it's been sitting in front of us this whole time saying that pH affects this herbicide. So is there a possibility in the future of variable rate and utilizing these direct inject systems with the information we have? I've been showing you pH maps. What I haven't shown you is that organic matter and texture and all that. If you're working with your person doing your soil sampling and you're doing zone soil sampling, that information's there, and in a lot of fields it's pretty accurate right now on how it lays out. So why not take something like organic matter and pH and texture and utilize this information and start to combine it and make application maps that actually match control based on pH, organic matter, texture in your own fields. So these are things I'm directly looking at the change in our implement plans for next year. So although seeing a rate from 3 on Spartan Charge in your hilltops where you're not going to burn the crop, and going to 8, which is a rate that not a lot of people use, blanket across fields, not to mention expensive, but will that create the better efficacy? So if you start to look where you're matching to your soil types, this particular example, we're only using a 5.5 ounce rate. Remember when I was saying earlier when I know guys are using 5 and 6 ounce rates and it's blowing through the Spartan? We're concerned about that. But now if we could use that same rate, average, across the board, and now vary it and actually put higher rates where we need to, because it's less soluble, we need to get more activity, maybe we can get in front of some of our weed control issues. And I'm picking on Spartan, but there's other chemistries. There's all of our chemistries are affected by pH one way or the other. But I know for this group, when we're talking sunflowers and we're talking Spartan, that's probably our highest use for that crop. And the reason I have that example. So does pH matter? I will let you guys answer yourself. Does it matter? For some of you, yes. Some of you, maybe not so much. So that, I thank you guys for the time. I'll take questions. And if you want to find me on social media, it's all Okke from Muskogee. And, thanks, Alison, for the plug on the Happy Hour podcast. If you like any of this and you want to listen to more stuff where you just get a couple yokels drinking beer and talking farming and agronomy, please feel free to listen.
All right, you talked about the lower pHs.
Yes.
Just do a brief synopsis on our 8.1s, our 7.9s.
So when I was saying when you go way down on pH, it's aluminum that causes issues. It's actually calcium that causes your issues on your high pHs. So almost to the same degree, your phosphate availability goes shrinks way up. You have a lot of different tie-up that happens there. And to the Spartan thing on the herbicide, that's where you could actually see so much activity that you could actually see issues with sunflowers and burning the crop. So at those pHs, you probably don't have as many weed control issues, but it might be because you have thin canopy from just other issues as far as the more nutrient related side of things.
So, Kyle, when you're running into these really low pHs, does it help at all to add foliar fertilizers into the program to help give that plant some of that iron and the calcium and the things that are all bound up in the soils? Does that help with yields or weed control at all?
It's a good question. I've always been a proponent of micronutrients being, it's a snapshot in time. So if you know, like there's critical growth periods where you could add a micronutrient that was critical for its growth. So why you're always adding zinc with your phosphate starters in corn. That's absolutely critical in cold soils. Boron, something that comes to mind with pollen tube formation. So anytime you're in reproduction periods. So I could see maybe with pH affecting availability and in those areas, could a micronutrient help? Possibly. I don't know the answer to that for sure. But the reality is on a pH issue, with almost every other nutrient, it affects things to such a degree that I don't know if foliar fed, spoon fed amounts can make the difference. And that's what we're currently looking at for the majority of us that are realizing we've got some major issues, is that we're looking at all the Band-Aid fixes to the soil acidity thing. And I think we've got more room as far as like falling and going down, because our production issues aren't as affected as maybe what is being preached to us. But once we're there, there's no remediation except for liming. And so I think it's more just building awareness to the issue and trying to prepare yourself for how you manage it. And this whole variable pH and variable weed control, I still only look as this is maybe a temporary fix to try to help ourselves get better weed control before we just manage the bigger problem.
Just a follow-up to that, because I'm in Southwest North Dakota too.
Yep.
So what's your answer to guys who are like, I think I just need to go deeper a bit? What's your answer to those guys? I'm just curious because I get that question too.
I don't know if there's a lot of good answers right now on that. I think that's the reason that we don't have these huge issues with poor stands and just dropping our yields off to the absolute floor, because once the plant roots can grow through that acidified layer, then everything's fine. I think that's what's buffering us. But again, over time, once you don't have the calcium and all that at the top, it's just going to keep dropping it lower and lower and lower as nitrogen leaches through the soil. So I mean, this is something that's been at least 30 years in the making, and it's just going to continue to move that direction.
Well, you had mentioned, I'd like to point out the nitrogen source. You were talking about urea. In the last 25 or 30 years, which you just talked about, I've seen a increased amount of ammonium sulfate, and I almost say very over-applied. That ammonium sulfate ramps up the acidification on acidic soils. So I think the sulfur source look that we've seen in the last 30 years, where guys are putting 150, 200 pounds of ammonium sulfate on those acidic soils, is rapidly increasing the acidification over urea. You want to talk on that?
It certainly isn't helping. That's for certain. I know, I've lived in Dickinson for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I was up in Devil's Lake. And, well, you get to where I live now, and canola is a huge part of it. It used to only be a canola thing. But we've seen a benefit by adding sulfate to everything. And so, yes, pound for pound, ammonium sulfate, definitely it acidifies at a much higher degree than nitrogen does. It's again, I think it's trying to find the balance, because if you look at there are alternate sulfur sources. Elemental sulfur, I would argue, isn't the answer to that, because we don't have, one, enough moisture in this season, but two, enough heat to start to actually oxidize and mineralize the elemental portion that turn it into sulfur that's available for the plants. And not to mention, elemental sulfur actually acidifies even worse than ammonium sulfate does. So then I've heard, trying to think of there's one brand that only a few retailers have, but then you could also go to gypsum, but then the expense of those products are a lot higher than ammonium sulfate. And again, sulfur is generally good. Like the higher we do this with nitrogen because we're getting better yields, sulfur is so important because it's like an efficiency factor for nitrogen. So you always hear about nitrogen and sulfur in a ratio with each other. You have to have enough sulfur to make your nitrogen go at its full, just like throttle performance. And then if you drop off, then your nitrogen use isn't efficient in the plant, and you won't, that's what you're seeing from yield gain on that. So I still see it as important, but it doesn't answer how we manage around sulfur use as far as the pH and acidification thing goes. I still think we're going to have to realize that we're going to have to find ways to lime to make this work for us in production.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Kyle will also be here throughout lunch. So if anyone has any questions, and he'll be helping to participate in some of the breakout sessions as well. And hopefully everybody will listen to the podcast on the way home today. Next up, I would like to introduce Trey Balvitsch from FMC. He grew up in Kenmere, North Dakota, with a strong ag background and has a BS from NDSU in crop and weed sciences with a minor in ag business. He is currently a Precision Platforms regional sales representative with FMC, covering a wide U.S. territory from California to North Dakota. And I realize, Trey, we did not intentionally mean to pick on Spartan right before your talk. So, but I think in all of this, it's really a group effort, understanding what the issues are out there and helping to be able to provide solutions for growers at the end of the day. So with that, Trey, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Like Alison mentioned, I'm Trey Balvitsch. I'm a Precision Platforms Regional Sales Rep for FMC. My territory consists of all the yellow. I have 5 other counterparts across the U.S. We commonly work with planting technologies, typically with dry PV systems with insecticides and fungicides. Oh, Mike. Yep. Suppose you guys can hear me a little better with that now. Usually I talk a little loud anyways. 2 products that are exclusively for the Thrive 3D application system I'm going to touch on today are Capture 3D and Ethos 3D. There is also another product I'll touch on later when we touch on the system that is for corn. Commonly, we're going to talk about Capture 3D and Ethos 3D benefits in sunflowers. The use rate for these, Capture 3D is 4 to 16 ounces. The unique thing about Capture 3D applied through the Thrive 3D system, at an 8-ounce rate, you can get 480 acres out of one system fill. One fill, plant all day. So this is for control in corn rootworm, broad spectrum seedling pests in corn, soybeans, dry beans, and peas, and also sunflowers. It also has broad spectrum pest control in seedlings before the damage occurs. Our next product we'll touch on is Ethos 3D. This use rate will run from 3.1 to 18.3 fluid ounces, depending on the pest of the targets as well. 428 acres at a 9.1 ounce rate. This has control in corn rootworm and broad spectrum seedling pests in corn, soybeans, dry beans, sunflowers, and peas as well. It also has broad spectrum disease control, including Pythium, Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium. The overall goal of this is to increase plant stands, increase grain production, and protect your yield potential. Protect your seed investment from the start. Here at FMC, we offer a complete sunflower protection portfolio designed to help growers at every stage of the growing season deliver broad spectrum control of disease, insects, and weeds. Utilizing these at-plant insecticides and insecticide fungicides, herbicides, and foliar insecticides, FMC has tools to combat the most pressing crop protection challenge facing sunflower quality and yields. Touching on Capture Thrive 3D again, this is exclusively for the use in Thrive 3D system. Most of you saw that was set up outside later today. That is our demo unit. We will touch on that later. Capture Thrive 3D insecticide combines proven insect control, your bifenthrin, innovative formulation, and precise low volume application in one convenient system. Capture Thrive 3D insecticide offers the agronomic benefits and proven performance of Capture LFR insecticides and can result in increased plant stands, healthier roots, and higher yield potential. Labeled pests include wireworms and cutworms in sunflowers. The main one I want to touch on today is Ethos 3D. Ethos 3D insecticide fungicide is broad spectrum in furrow seedling defense, exclusively for use in the Thrive 3D application system for greater grower efficiency. It's very similar to Capture Thrive 3D. It has a bifenthrin in there for insect control. It also has a biological in there for disease control as well. Once applied, the biofungicide component grows along the root structure to build a defensive barrier to infection from fungal pathogens. It suppresses damping off diseases caused by Pythium, Phytophthora, Fusarium, and Rhizoctonia. Again, it also has protection against wireworms and cutworms. Results from Ethos 3D insecticide fungicide include more uniform seedling emergence, increased stand counts, and improved root protection for greater moisture and nutrient uptake, all in which help optimize crop yields. How does the biological work in Ethos 3D insecticide fungicide? Competitive inclusion. It colonizes the roots, forming a biofilm of protection within the furrow. Grows with the roots. It creates a barrier by outcompeting pathogens. Direct toxicity and antibiosis. Antifungal metabolites are secreted as spores germinate and colonize on the roots. Influences cell membrane and wall integrity of certain pathogens. Antifungal liliopeptides are formed in the fermentation process. In these pictures, here you can see as it is growing with the crop throughout the root structure as it grows. And to the right, you can see in those much more colonization and progress, the solid arrows to the right indicate fully colonized root hairs. The dash arrows indicate the beginning of the colonization process. Colonies expand with actively growing root systems, building a pathogen barrier around the root zone throughout the season. Here's a good chart that we did some sunflower testing on Ethos 3D up in towards my hometown up in northwestern North Dakota, Mohall, North Dakota. This was done by NDSU, Dr. J. Knodel and Bizwa, I believe I think. The unique thing you see about this is looking at the different products used with sunflowers. Going from Ethos 3D in the furrow at a 9.2 ounces, just the yield pounds an acre and plants per acre is much higher than the untreated check. Now looking to the far right, looking at your cruiser, it is still much more greater, up about 300 pounds an acre. Looking at Capture LFR, which is just your liquid fertilizer ready version of the Capture 3D application. And then your Ethos XB, which is also your liquid fertilizer ready formulation compared to your Ethos 3D application. Continuing on wireworm pressure. Wireworms take a vast effect ratio on damage on these developing roots of a seedling and or germinating seed. Damage will occur in various spots, creating stand issues that may require replanting. The result of pressure is wilting after emergence if the seedling hasn't already died. The picture here to the left is showing just the damage that comes unnoticed with sunflowers and wireworms. They attack before the seedling has emerged. The most pressure comes in those area and rotations where it's grass pressure and high moisture, as that's where they like to thrive. Wireworm damage tends to be more noticeable where grasses and grain crops are growing in years previous. Again, most damage will occur earlier, being unnoticed, attacking germinating seeds, young seedlings, and roots, resulting in the wilting of plants, causing death at time of emergence or before surface break. These larvae orient to the smell of these germinating seeds. The life cycle is 3 to 4 years to develop, up to 7 years. At planting times, these pests move towards the soil where the moisture is there and the soil is much more cooler compared to summer months where they dig more deeper into soil for those favorable temps. Females can reemerge and move to other locations and cause infestation by laying more eggs. Like I mentioned, during the summer months, when the soil temperatures rise, the wireworms will dig deeper into the soil for those favorable conditions. Later in the seasons, as temperature cool, wireworms tend to make an appearance again to resume feeding, in which damage varies at this plant growth stage. Ethos 3D targeted pests in sunflowers. Wireworm, grape clospis, white grub species, armyworm, seed corn maggot, root aphids, army cutworm species, and of course, with that biological suppression of damping off seedling blights and root or crown disease caused by Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Fusarium, or Phytophthora. Now, how are these 3D products, Ethos and Capture, applied? They're applied through the Thrive 3D application system. How many of you here are familiar with the Thrive 3D application system? Few. So it's going to be a learning environment for everyone. Perfect. The main thing that we talk about is efficiency. Fill once, plant all day. Like I mentioned about the Capture, you get 480 acres out of one system fill. It's low volume at an 8-ounce rate. Ethos 3D, you get 425 acres out of one system fill. Efficiency and low volume. The system fills in about 10 minutes. It's 90% less water than traditional liquids, half the weight of granules, no mixing, no measuring. The Thrive 3D converts traditional high volume applications to low volumes through patented technologies. It's a self-contained 3D application system, 130-gallon water tank, 30-gallon product tank. Like I mentioned, 30 gallons, low volume, you get that high acres out of one fill. The system control components are the pump pack, precision flow meter, air compressor, association plumbing, and wire harnesses. The three-dimensional foam solution is brought up through the manifold where there's liquid and air orifices and compressed air where the air is brought, the solution up out through the manifold down into the furrow, and it's applied as a foam. The foam expands as a zone of protection in the furrow up to 50%. So it's a 360-dimensional foam barrier, zone of protection on and around the seed in the furrow. Here's a good video just explaining the whole process. The unique thing I like about the Thrive 3D system is the efficiency and the low volume. Fill once, plant all day, saving time, fuel. Acres are covered in a short period of volume, along with being this constant bead of foam of the 360 dimensional coverage in your furrow on the seed, around the seed, that zone of protection. Its accuracy at any ground speed, adjust to your planting speed. Everything is taken into effect on your planter. So the low volume applications save water, like I mentioned, fuel, labor, time, simplifying and speeding the planting operations. Here's just a good demonstration showing a planter with the Thrive 3D system. An empty system weighs about 280 pounds. System filled with 30 gallons of product and 130 gallons of water is about 1,800 pounds. So the weight there is evenly distributed with no effect on the planter. The nice thing about Thrive 3D system and its products, convenient packaging and system fill. 15-gallon returnable kegs, 2 kegs fill 1 system. Transfer pumps are provided with the application system. Product can be recirculated prior to delivery to the applicator. And it's closed transfer and quick connect dry lock valves minimize exposure to the product. Excuse me. The other one I want to touch on very lightly today is Xyway 3D, which is the other product that can go through the Thrive 3D application system. Use rate is about 11.8 fluid ounces an acre, 320 acres per system fill. Inside out disease protection from planting to harvest. Through trifill. Translocates throughout the whole corn throughout the growing season as the corn grows. Protection is present before disease infection. Root growth and development, increased root mass, improves water and nutrient availability, just like Capture and Ethos do. Stock integrity, greater stock stability, and less potential for lodging and concerns. As I mentioned, covering across these products, we have different formulations of Capture. Capture your liquid fertilizer ready. Capture Thrive 3D through the application system, apply to this foam with the low volume. Xyway 3D, Ethos 3D, and also the LFR version liquid fertilizer, Ethos XB. All can be applied, Capture 3D can all be applied if you have liquid fertilizer already, and if you don't have liquid, which is a phenomenal route to go. Fit the way you farm. It mounts to almost any planter out there. I've placed systems this year on Kinsey planters, white planters, case planters, multiple John Deere planters. They can mount almost anywhere on your recommendation on a planter. We fit the way you farm. Where do you want it mounted? We work with that. It's all about each planter is being separate than another grower. Not one planter is exactly the same. So, Thrive 3D, no initial cost. It's a commitment of gallons of 3 years, system is yours, installation costs free. This is the program that we run with Thrive 3D overall. And we can touch on more of that later if you have more questions about that. So along with that commitment program of just the covering across the Ethos and Capture for sunflowers, you can mix and match and all those. We also have our alternate brands that can cover for portions of those gallons made for the system coverage. Going from Anthem brands, Hero Insecticide, Steward, Lucento, and Top Guard. Here's just a Thrive 3D commitment example I like to show everyone, just to show across. Like I mentioned, Capture Thrive 3D at 8 ounces, about 1,600 acres. Ethos 3D is about 1,500 acres. Xyway 3D at a full commitment is about 1,500 acres. We can mix and match with those. You can mix and match on if you were to do Capture on sunflowers and you wanted to do Ethos on corn. You mix and match in those commitment rates to meet that qualifying gallons. At this time, I'll take any questions from you all.
So what is the price per acre that you're looking at for these chemicals you're putting? I take it your commitment is you buy so much of the chemical.
Correct.
Can you,
What
re-
does it cost per acre per application?
can you
For,
repeat the question for the online group in the microphone? Okay, or just repeat the question.
so price per acre. It's a good question. So depending on the retail location, it can vary from 18 to 22 per acre. Now, the commitment going off of that, like we mentioned, it's a 3-year commitment. Depending on planter size, 24-row planter will run 105 gallons for ethos and capture, which is about 1,500 acres coverage per year. That will cover the system within 3 years. If you like, most guys, 12 row, so it's still 105 gallons. Most guys do end up doing the single commitment the first year, and then actually there's a multiple group of people that actually finish commitment within 2 years. It's just a minimum balance across 3 years. The product commitment can be met in 2 years or 3. Questions?
Just a quick question. As far as maintenance, day-to-day startup, shutdown day, what are some of the timeframes? And at the end of the year, what kind of maintenance do you have involved with this unit?
Yep, good question. So essentially, it's almost like a sprayer. At the end of the day when planting, there's a clean out. So like I mentioned, it can go through an ISO, which is the most popular option to counsel in your tractor. There's a button for a clean out, just as if you were to clean out your sprayer at the end of the day or move to a different field. We recommend to flush those lines. And then maintenance-wise, winterized, RV antifreeze, certain amount of water in RV antifreeze, and that's good for the year.
I have a question, Trey. So you showed some data out of Mohall area,
Yep.
NDSU. Are you guys seeing an increase in wireworm pressure in some of these no-till South Dakota areas?
South Dakota, I haven't heard too much about. I guess that might be a good question for Drew. He would probably know. I know. Drew, you want to come answer a question for me?
Drew, the question was, are you guys seeing an increase in wireworm pressure in growers' fields specifically for South Dakota?
I guess just based off of the accounts that I call on, I would say in general, yes. The talk is that there's going to be a lot more bifenthrin going out this spring. Have I been out there seeing them personally? No, I'm going off of all my accounts, but in general, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, wireworms can sometimes be a little tricky. It's not quite as easy as finding a cutworm in the field. So, thank you. Are there any other questions for Trey? All right. Thank you very much for
Perfect.
joining us today. And Trey will
Thank
also
you.
be one of the breakout sessions this afternoon as well. Next, we have Dr. Jarrad Prasifka. He is a research entomologist with USDA's Agricultural Research Service in Fargo, North Dakota. Jarrad has worked on insect management in cotton, sorghum, corn, and perennial grasses. He has focused on sunflower insects since coming to Fargo in 2011. His research is split between management of insect pests and working on improving sunflower pollination by bees. We felt that it was really important to invite Jarrad to come and talk. He has done a lot of work on red sunflower seed weevil, along with Adam Varenhorst out of SDSU and Janet Knodel out of NDSU, and we are increasingly getting feedback that it is becoming a bigger and bigger issue on resistance, specifically for South Dakota. So we are excited to have you here today. Thanks, Jarrad.
Thank you, Alison, and thanks everybody for your attention. I'll try not to delay lunch any more than necessary. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the red sunflower seed weevil, how it's gotten to be as significant a problem in central South Dakota as it is today, and something that we can do about it that folks, I don't think, have been considering until very recently. And on this slide, you can see on the left, seed weevil adults on a sunflower head, the larvae that drop out in the middle, and the way that we assess damage on samples of sunflower is with these x-rays you can see on the right. If you're sitting relatively close, you can see those damaged seed. So I'll talk very briefly about pest status for the seed weevil and the idea of avoidance as a pest management strategy or element of pest management, and then talk about why we're seeing such high populations, what cultural practices like hybrid selection and planting date can do with this insect in the crop, and talk about planting habits in central South Dakota using some data from RMA. And then very briefly talk about our future research and have time for a little bit of discussion. So the red seed weevil is the primary seed feeding insect pest for North America. We see this in surveys sponsored by the National Sunflower Association, which take place every other year. And we see some damage in most samples and really high levels of damage in some seed samples. You can see those little bubbles on the right. The size of the bubble is the severity of the damage. And so, for example, in 2021, we had a field, 76% of the seed was damaged by red seed weevil, which is obviously a train wreck. I'm not sure that image illustrates it so clearly, but over the last 3 or so surveys, the common trend is 2 to 3 times the average level of red seed weevil damage in South Dakota as compared to North Dakota. And that's a trend and a concern that we'll come back to in subsequent slides. So obviously, the concerns with the seed weevil, that's not a great thing. That doesn't make anybody happy. What are the weaknesses? What can we take advantage of? The things that come to mind for me as an entomologist, the insect has 1 generation per year. So it's not something that can build up within a year. It's not something with repeated peaks. You have 1 critical period. The other weakness is that it's host specific to sunflowers. It's not going to attack multiple crops like cutworms or something like that. It's focused on sunflowers. And so one of the ways that we can use those liabilities is simply avoidance. This is not my idea. This is something that was, to a certain degree, developed and proven 40 years ago. And it's simply avoiding them by timing your bloom to miss a lot of the weevils. So normal bloom, I would say late July to mid-August. Based on talking to aerial applicators in this area, they're not really making applications until the first week of August. But either by planting early or planting early maturing hybrids, or both of those things, you can miss some of the weevil population. So in this slide, the solid line is actual weevil emergence data from Fargo, North Dakota. So you can see it starting that second week or so in July and picking up and getting, by mid-July, about half the weevils were out. You might say, well, that's not feasible to get bloom by that time. And the good news is that that solid line is maybe aspirational. The dotted line is something that takes into account the fact that these weevils aren't ready to go when they come out of the ground. They're going to come out of last year's sunflower ground. They have to find this year's sunflowers. They have to mate, and the female weevils need to feed on pollen for about 6 days before they're ready to lay eggs. So you probably have another 10 days after weevil emergence starts. And if you see those little yellow humps, the early or middle ones, you can avoid most of or about half of the weevil population. So what are the causes of high populations that we've seen in recent years? And I've listed a bunch of possible explanations on this slide, some of which I think are better supported than others. Certainly, losing chlorpyrifos doesn't make weevil management easier. Neither does the evidence that we're seeing in South Dakota of resistance of weevil populations to some pyrethroids. But I want you to go back to that idea that what we see in North Dakota is a lot less than what we see in South Dakota in terms of population and severity of the problem. And the image from NDSU Extension on the right shows results of surveys that they do every summer. These are 2022 data. Anywhere that doesn't have a red triangle is a location where they had essentially populations lower than threshold, less than 4 weevils per plant. I think people here would think that was wonderful because, you know, folks are reporting 100, 200, 400 weevils per head. So yeah, it's very different in North Dakota. They do still get significant damage sometimes, but why is that? Certainly, you guys are warmer in South Dakota than we are up there. You have less tillage, and you have, to a certain degree, more concentrated sunflower acreage. And so those are ideas I would put out there. And to comment a little further on these ideas or these possible causes, it's not chlorpyrifos. That makes today harder. That's not why the last several years populations have been really high. The problem was bad before that happened. Same thing with resistance to pyrethroids. Maybe that contributes, but you had high populations of red seed weevils before resistance was likely widespread. One of the things that to keep in mind about the weevils, they spend the winter in the soil as larvae. So that picture you can see on the right of the slide, those little light-colored dots are weevil larvae, and you can see a ruler on the left there. The vast majority of weevil larvae are between 0 to 3 inches deep in the soil. And so that's one of the reasons why I think limited tillage is a liability. South Dakota no-till has increased historically, and you have way more no-till here than we do up in the Dakotas. I'm not necessarily saying to change that, but that's part of the explanation as to why the problem is so severe. Obviously, your winters are warmer than North Dakota winters, but nationwide, we've had the 6 warmest winters on record in more than 100 years since 2012. We've had those 6 hottest winters. With regard to sunflower acreage, central South Dakota acreage, the 4 counties around here, it's not up a lot, but it definitely is up a bit relative to past decades. And so I think all of those are contributing factors. I'll talk a little bit more about these. With regard to winter temperatures, we had a graduate student up at NDSU who worked on weevil cold tolerance. The thing she found in the laboratory is they can withstand temperatures that are freezing, but once you get beyond a certain point, -4 to -8 Celsius, that's when they really start dying. Prolonged exposure to those temperatures causes high levels of weevil death. And we really saw a good contrast in nature during the time that she was working on her education. That winter 2019 to 2020, average soil temperatures where we were always above 0 C. And we put weevils into the soil, a known number, and then put traps over those locations and looked at what emerged. And while most of the weevils died, about 12% of them survived the winter. The next year, we did have a significant stretch of time where soil temperatures were below that -4 level, and we had about 80% fewer weevils emerge. So it really makes a big difference, just a few degrees when you're at the threshold of what they can tolerate. So certainly up there we benefit from winter kill. You guys probably less so. And the other thing to think about is snow cover. That really is a liability for us in terms of it insulates the weevils. And so it helps them survive a bit. Keeping in the trend of upsetting the PowerPoint. All right, I'm not sure how we get this to move.
This one.
Oh, well, that's, sorry, so I didn't realize it was changing for you and not for me, so. Holy smokes. Okay, so with regard to tillage, some of this will be really old research. There was some excellent work done with seed weevils by SDSU and NDSU back in the 80s. And then again, we'll talk about some more recent data. Work at a couple locations in South Dakota looked at a variety of different tillage treatments. They saw 20 to 40% reductions in adult emergence. The work that we did recently in Fargo, we actually weren't interested in tillage, but we were looking at the effects of ground cover, looking at fallow versus something that would normally follow sunflowers, like a spring wheat crop. And so you can see in the background on that slide, the foreground, those little painted areas, that's where we put weevils into the ground and we left it fallow. And then behind that, you can see the flags where spring wheat was planted. Just planting spring wheat with those narrow rows cut weevil survival and emergence by about 2/3. So really, they're very vulnerable in the upper level of the soil. I mentioned the increased population, the increasing acreage of sunflowers here in central South Dakota. You can see some of the data from NASS on this slide, looking at the last 15 years or so. And it's really not up that much over earlier years, but they're really packed in tightly. And so you can see the image on the left, that yellow color, that's sunflower. Those fields are very close together. The weevils don't have far to move. And the thing I want you to keep in mind is a weevil management problem in one year, whether it's yours or your neighbor's, will be someone else's problem the next year. So if you have somebody who's a new sunflower grower who's not being really proactive about managing the insect, their problem this year is your problem next year. With regard to avoidance in this early planting or early maturing hybrids, work was done both in North Dakota and South Dakota decades ago. In North Dakota, the results were positive, but maybe not as dramatic in South Dakota. Planting in that early to mid-May, you could reduce damage 20 to 40%. These SDSU trials at that time were far more dramatic, and again, possibly with higher weevil populations. Plantings in that first week of May without the use of insecticides could get damage down below 10%, which is about an 80% reduction. When they also planted that first week of May and used an early blooming hybrid with no insecticide, they're down to 3% seed weevil damage, which is remarkable. So we tried something similar up in Dickinson. Ryan Beto put these plantings out this past summer. And you can look, the dates we have, the earliest date is late May, which is not really early. There was an earlier date that gophers destroyed. So I wish I could show you good data for that, but I can't. But we do see the same trend, no insecticides, modest weevil populations, but we're down to that 5 or 7% damage at the late May date, and then we're up above 10 or up above 20 as we go later in the season. So an early blooming hybrid planted in late May with no insecticides, we're down under that 5% damage. And I should be clear, I'm not advocating that you don't use an insecticide, but these are no insecticide trials so that we have the fairest possible comparison. Otherwise, you'd have to time insecticide for the bloom of each hybrid on each date, and it kind of becomes a nightmare. So this is a bit closer to home. This is just down the road at the Dakota Lakes Research Farm, and this is a couple of different SDSU folks. No insecticides again, very high seed weevil levels. And so on these x-rays, you can see samples from late May, early June, and mid-June. So the one on the upper left, late May, about 20% damaged seed. About a week later, the damage goes up to 50%. And then that middle lowest one, June 17th, 96% damage. That's a disaster. I wished we had an earlier date. It turns out we did. The farm manager at Dakota Lakes, Sam Ireland, actually planted earlier than any of Adam's plantings. So same location, no insecticides, and he got out about 10 days earlier, May 16th. Less than 10% damage on those untreated acres, yields of about 2,450 pounds, and oil content 40 to 41%. And some of that was lost due to weevil damage. Again, no insecticides. So I'll talk a little bit now about what planting habits are like in central South Dakota, and I'm really just talking about the 4 counties specified on this slide. These are data from RMA, and I'm not going to show any yield data. Probably everyone in this room knows more than I do about crop insurance and how RMA functions. All I can say is the yield data that are available from them are complicated, so we're not going to talk about that. But these are grower-reported planting date data, and it's not for single fields, it's for insured units. So if a unit shows a planting date of June 3rd, that means the last field in that unit was planted on June 3rd. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some data from, recent data from SDSU and USDA. Okay, so this slide is a histogram showing number of insured units planted on various dates. And basically the height of the bar on a date is how many insured units finished planting on that day. And what's in the shaded area, that kind of blue box, is the window for crop insurance. So what you see, those asterisks, the first one going left to right, is that kind of mid-May, when Sam's sunflowers had about 10% damage, only 1% of growers last year in this 4-county area said they had insured units that were planted by that date. The date that had about 20% damage out of Dakota Lakes is that second asterisk, and that's about 4% of growers were planted by that time. The vast majority of sunflowers are being finished off when we have the most weevils going to show up on the landscape. So most of the planting window is really not being used that first 4 or 5 weeks. And just like I'm not telling you to not use insecticides, I'm not telling you plant on the 26th of April. That may not be possible. It's insurable, but it may not be reasonable. But the thing to think about is, is something like the second week of May possible for you? Is that a thing you think you could try? Because you might be able to duck a lot of weevils. So the previous slide, the histogram showed about 25% of the acreage was being finished off, planting was being finished after June 15th. June 15th used to be the last date for crop insurance for this area. How do we get here? How is this happening? And I wasn't here at that time, but I know how it happened. And there was research done by SDSU that looked at dates later than June 15th and compared them to June 15th as the sunflower planting date. And this slide shows yield data. The blue bar is June 15th. The blue bars are almost always highest. And so really what you see, my arrow on the right should indicate the best yields were earlier, and honestly, they should have had a treatment that was earlier than June 15th so they could get an idea as to what you're giving up planting as late as June 15th. So the data showed early, or at least early relative to when lots of folks are planting now, is better for yield, but these data were still used to expand the RMA window past June 15th. it's not just the single measure of yield. If you look at oil content, this is the same study, and this is the oil data, you're giving up about 0.5% of oil per day later that you plant than that June 15th. I would argue that the trend now is more dramatic, and it's not because of the plant, it's because of the insects. So this slide, and I apologize if it's, you can't see it all very clearly, but you can either squint or take my word for it. These are data from Brent Holke, one of our geneticists and breeders. He does yield trials in Oneida because it's an important environment to represent, in addition to the places he does yield trials in North Dakota. He planted in mid-June 2022, pretty typical for the area. He planted into a grower field, and his yield trial got treated when the surrounding acreage, grower's acreage, was treated with insecticide. His data show that for every single day later that bloom occurred for any of the plots in the yield trial, you're losing 1% oil. And that's because after that one insecticide application provided some protection, there's no more protection. This late bloom stuff is just getting hit harder and harder and harder. So Brent has indicated that he does not feel great about the data he got last year. He's not going to stop planting yield trials down here. He is going to try to plant before the middle of May so that he can escape this biblical damage by seed weevils. So the conclusions of my data and other people's data are that there are a lot of different reasons why weevils are surviving in greater numbers, particularly in South Dakota. And if you think about it, it's year after year after year. It's just like the concept of compounding interest. Even if they're only growing 5% a year, in a decade, you're going to have twice as many weevils. So it doesn't take much of a change to spiral out of control. No tactic is going to be a cure-all. Not insecticides, not early planting. And Sam Ireland was in the room earlier. I don't know if he ducked out, but one of the things that he remarked to me when he sent his samples up to me to be x-rayed and have oil content data, when I sent the numbers back to him, he said, wow, that May 16th date, I can't believe how little damage there was, because there were weevils all over those plants. How is that possible? I said, Sam, I don't know. I wasn't there. I take your word for it that you know what a weevil looks like and that you had high populations. The best explanation is his sunflowers were the first sunflower pollen that those female weevils could get to. So his crop was almost done blooming by the time that they were ready to lay eggs. And then everything that bloomed subsequent to that, all those female weevils were ready to go. So even if I planted early and I felt good about it because Jarrad told you so, or Sam told you so, or somebody else, if your plants are covered in weevils, you might still want to spray. But over time, just like the compounding interest will cause them to grow, it should get better over time if we actually shift to earlier planting. You should have fewer and fewer weevils every year because they'll have fewer opportunities to reproduce. Obviously, this is a South Dakota group, but I tell people in North Dakota, don't think that you are out of the woods. North Dakota is at risk to the Red River Valley up there in the 90s, had reports places where they'd have 100 weevils or more per head. So it can come back, and I think they need to be mindful of that. In the coming year, we're going to try to do both more and better work in terms of not only looking at the effects of early planting, early blooming hybrids on weevil damage, but getting better yield data, oil content data, so people have a better overall impression of what they might expect if they're planting earlier than they're used to. And with that, I'll just say that obviously I don't get paid anymore if you plant early. But I'm happy to hear about it If you do it or if you're considering it, send me an email, shoot me a text. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to take samples if you say, I'm going to plant one field early and I'm going to plant these other fields at my normal planting time. I'd be happy to help you find out what that has meant to your pest management. The other thing I'll mention quickly is that in addition to insecticides and early planting and other pest management options, we do have inbred lines with resistance to red seed weevils. It's not like BT, it's not magic, but it's like 70% less damage per weevil. I don't believe that's in any commercial hybrids. And the primary reason why is that the trait that provides resistance has not been mapped genetically. So it makes it hard for a company to work with, and they don't want to deal with that. So we need to place a June planted resistance trial that won't be sprayed down here where it's going to get challenged with weevils. So if you can think of a place that could fit a small footprint like I show on this slide for a no insecticide trial, you could also email me or text me. It just needs to be a place where we know we'll get good weevil pressure. And there is weevil pressure in North Dakota, but, and frankly, some places in Nebraska, but not like here. So the answer to the question, does it have to be in South Dakota, is no. We'd like it here. I quickly want to acknowledge National Sunflower Association, who's funded some of the work by the graduate student you can see on the right, Shauna. She's digging weevils out of the ground, frozen ground in February. RMA for sharing data, Adam, Sam, and Ryan for helping with some of these early planting trials. And with that, hopefully there's a little time for questions.
The mic's coming around. The conversation as well will continue on the breakout sessions. So Jarrad is a breakout session table just to give some good small group brainstorming ideas. And we've also asked Kyle Okke to sit in on that as well.
Well, where do these weevils survive when there is no sunflowers? Maybe for years. They have to be feeding on something or...
Yeah, so the question of where they survive when there is no sunflowers is probably wild sunflowers. There are a couple of other composite weeds or wild plants that they've been reported to be found on, but just because they're on it doesn't mean that they can survive and reproduce on it. So yeah, it's sunflowers is what they need to live. And places where there are wild sunflowers, but not cultivated sunflowers, like when I go home to Texas and I go looking for weevils because that's what bug nerds do on vacation, you see, one here, one there, that's it.
How far can they travel?
The answer is we don't know. And I've been asked the question, how far do they travel? A lot. The only thing that I'll say is 24 hours a day, the only thing they have to do is find food and mate. And they fly, right? So if I could walk 20 miles in a day and they can fly, you're not likely to be safe by just going a little further down the road. So I realize that doesn't actually answer the question, how far do they go? But farther than you want to go to plant sunflowers.
Just a quick question. There's been a theory out there that has to do with evaporation and humidity. And there's some people that believe that as we cut some of the water rates with our insecticides that we're losing efficacy. Is there any research dollars, or is anybody taking that and doing different rates, say 1 gallon, 2 gallon, all the way to 5 gallons with the same insecticide packages in high humidity or low humidity and in extreme heat? Because the theory has to go around evaporation before it reaches the canopy and contact.
Yeah, so in response to the question of, is anybody looking at increasing the amount of water in an application, holding insecticide rates steady? I don't think anybody is for this pest. I think in general, yeah, paying a little more for water means you're going to get better coverage. But I don't think anybody is pursuing that. It's been a while since I talked to any of the aerial applicators about how common it is for folks for this critter to request to go above that 2-gallon level. So I don't know if they're seeing more people willing to pay for that.
Is that something for Kate, is there a block behind sprayers, vacuum blocks?
Yeah, I don't know for a fact whether you could replicate something like that without truly doing aerial applications. I suspect you can't. The closest thing I know of that's like a university research that is in the area of what you're asking is I know that in the Nebraska Panhandle, they're looking at aerial applications where they just target the perimeter of the field rather than the whole field. And the reason they're doing that is not because they think it's any more effective. How could that be more effective? It's that they've had such a massive backlog. They've had more requests for sprays than acres they could cover. And so they're trying to figure out with their lower populations, can we get away with just spraying the perimeter and make sure everybody gets their acreage covered?
Ask that in the breakout. When Jarrad has a lot to say.
We have a strong take in the back of the room.
Years ago, decades ago, when I'd scout sunflowers, sometimes you would be at the South Dakota State University economic threshold, and sometimes you'd be below it. And now when I scout sunflowers, it's like you look, okay, we're, call the sprayer guy, because they're just, it's so far beyond economic thresholds, it's just an automatic that you're going to spray. I guess my question is, what about the bees? How much damage am I doing to bees, and different chemicals that we could use, and where's the happy medium on this?
I'll respond to the question about what does universal reliance on insecticide do to the bees with the following observation. As Alison remarked, I do research on bees and sunflower pollination. And my research plots never get sprayed. Brent Holke's nursery that I work in sometimes it gets sprayed, usually only once, and you have several plantings, so they could avoid some of that. I needed to collect bees for a research project. I went to a local grower field. I needed to collect 150 bees, sunflowers as far as the eye can see. I see 2 bees. I go into my plots. There's 2 bees on every plant. So certainly they suffer somewhat for our reliance on insecticides. I would argue that the data suggest that after a few years, if planting shifted earlier, you could go from planting early and still calling for insecticides to maybe planting early and not needing them. There's always going to be folks that have to plant late because of rain, because of sunflower is following a failed crop, but someone should be using the first 5 weeks of the planting window. It would benefit everyone.
I had experience with bees this year. We had to change a chemical. They always said spray early in the morning if you had bees around. We went out for 5 days after the chemical was put on, had 100% loss in our bees. This new chemical.
Yeah, it's tough on them, and it's not just an as you point out. It's not necessarily just a day or two blip. It's hard to generalize and say, like you were told, spray at this time of day and you'll avoid them. It depends upon what kind of day it is.
We probably always had loss, but we had our bees. But this year was a different spray because the old spray was taken.
Yeah.
There was no survivors.
So I've had some guys in central South Dakota that, they'll plant right around that 15th of June timeframe. And because the cutworm is kind of out at the same time, they'll put an insecticide in with the burn down and then go in and plant a few days later. And some of those guys have felt that by doing that, they've cut their red seed weevil later on in the season. And I was just wondering if anybody's ever done any research on that, or if it's just in a matter of opinion. Like catching of that coming right out.
I guess I would say I doubt it. I won't say no, because I don't think anybody has looked.
I think we have time for one more question and then two more questions, and then we'll continue on the great discussion at the breakout sessions. Go ahead.
My question would be, is that, let's say that everybody in the room could go to May 16th and we did it for 5 years, would the problem just follow us back?
I can't say definitively that the answer is no. I'll answer your question in two parts. One, if everybody did that, I think you'd have a big reduction in total weevil populations. Two, would the weevils start emerging earlier? It's possible. We know, I think that in other parts of the country, because these weevils, it's from Canada to down into Texas. The weevils in Texas emerge at a different time. They seem to respond to temperature differently than our weevils, but I don't know if they can come out much earlier. Wouldn't it be great to find out? It means we at least have dodged the problem for a few years. It would take years for that to show up. And right now we're trying to buy time in an emergency. So I'd love to find out.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this question comes from somebody that's fortunate enough not to have a lot of experience with seed weevils. So, but really, if you could, Jarrad, can you quantify an economic threshold, a number of weevils on where you would spray, or the damage, or where not to spray? Asking for just some quantifying information.
Yeah, I feel like it. So obviously the economic thresholds vary with the price of the commodity and the price of the chemical and all those things. But, and anybody in the room, shout out if you disagree, but I hear 4 a lot. 4 weevils per plant. And here people are getting 10, 25, 100 times that many weevils. So that is, as a gentleman remarked earlier, he didn't use the word comical, but that threshold is comical compared to what people are seeing.
Yeah, I would agree with that 4 weevil per head. And then if it's a specialty market, con oils, confections, that's brought down quite a bit less. I think confections a lot of times is 1, just because the value is a lot higher. So thank you so much, Jarrad, and can't wait for the conversation to continue on that. Okay, next up, we have 2 gentlemen that are going to be speaking next. Daniel Altepeter is the owner and president of Air Cedar Parts, headquartered in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Dan grew up on his family farm outside of East Grand Forks and has a degree in farm management. He returned to take over the family farm, where he became frustrated enough with his corroded air seeder that he began to research and eventually assist in engineering his first part. Since then, Dan and his company sells over 150 parts exclusively through John Deere's A&I Products aftermarket division and continue to grow. And also with Dan, we have Craig Nice. He is the field engineer at Air Seeder Parts and owns Nice Ag Services, a custom seeding business near his hometown of Minto, North Dakota. Craig graduated from the John Deere Ag Tech program at North Dakota State College of Science in Wahpeton, and he started his custom seeding operation in 2002 and currently covers 18,000 acres on average, not including his own crops. You can find him farming and custom seeding April through October and working for Air Seeder Parts November through March. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, so yeah, my name's Dan Altepeter, and I still am a farmer. My family farm was about 5,000 acres there in the northern Red River Valley, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, and we raised crops like corn, wheat, soybeans. We raised sunflowers, field peas, dry edible beans, crops like that.
And like she said, I do custom seeding and I do farm. My farm mostly consists of small grains and soybeans because I used to raise corn, sugar beets and stuff, but interfered with my custom business. But we custom seed anything that will go through air drills. We run hoe drills, disc drills, plant sunflowers, wheat, millet, I mean, everything, cover crops. So if you can put it through a drill, we've done it. Which leads us to where we are today.
That's right. And what we wanted to talk about today, I guess, why we're here is we want the air seeder to be not the less desirable method of planting sunflowers. So we've been working a lot on the metering of sunflowers, doing it in a way where we're not doing seed damage, but yet we also want to have not a pulsation of the product flowing through the meter, is important. A lot of people say that sunflowers really should be planted with a row crop planter, and yes, I mean they do a good job, but we also have a lot of people have that air seeder sitting there, and if we can use it, more the better. So that's kind of what we're doing is, we're making improvements to the metering system especially on the John Deere air seeder, so that we can do a better job of planting sunflowers with that air seeder.
And where we start with that is with our continuate rollers. As you see on the slide, we have many colors. One color to match everyone John Deere OEM has, plus a white one of our own. But the three up there would be the ones that we've been testing with sunflowers. We use the black. The rates kind of determine on what kind of transmission or drive system you have on your cart. I personally use aftermarket hydraulic drives, so I can spin my meters really, really slow. So I use a coarser meter like a black. And as ours are continue rate, they have a slight twist to them. So the seed isn't pausing, it's continually flowing out of the meter, and you get better simulation that way, like in soybeans or sunflowers, any of those seeds, you really notice it. And it just works very well for that.
Yeah, the original meter design, imagine it had a straight cut flute, with, on the yellow and green one, the Flexicoils, those, all the different brands, the straight cut flute, and what we would see happening a lot of times is it had a chop. It came out in a pulse. So that twisted design is something that really helps with that. It's called the continue rate because it's constantly dropping product, and that was one of the things that we used to see is groups of threes and then then a large gap. So that was what we were after with that twisted design. That's something we came out with a few years ago. Now we're coming with things more like inside the meter roller. There's an insert that is used. There's and really, this is the cutaway of a John Deere. And what we're looking at there is the picture on the right side is what's available, or what we've been using, which is a yellow or a black, but I mean a yellow, the cartridge plus the yellow insert. If you notice, there's 2 ridges, and what we find happening is the seeds, as they're going through that meter, they start to roll, and that's what happens then is we get a lot of tips breaking off. And so that was one thing we wanted to note. We wanted to change. If you notice, the one that on the left side there has a very smooth insert in its place, and what that does is we're trying to keep any rolling inside that meter, just to a minimum, so that less chances of breaking the tips off. And we've taken, in our testing, we've taken 6 or 7% seed damage down to 1% by using that.
I know this is mostly sunflowers, but where this insert, the white in that left meter, was designed originally was for canola, and to help truly meter canola and stop siphoning out of the tank. We will get some siphoning with the sunflowers with the yellow, but if you switch to what's going to be gray, what's in the photograph it's white, but production will be gray. That'll stop the siphoning. So when your fan's running, there's actually a vacuum underneath the meter, and the seeds will get sucked out, and that insert eliminates that from happening.
Yeah, and so really, we're just trying to make the air seeder become more of a desirable method of seeding. Like Craig and I say, we want to be able to run. We want to be able to plant anything with our air drill because we have them, and so that's kind of what we're doing. Now we've also taken, going back to the rollers there a little bit. Craig's mentioned, hydraulic drive. Hydraulic drive is something that we can run our rollers, very slow. Because of this continue-rate, the twisted roll design, we can run that, really, really slow RPM, and it doesn't have we don't see the pulse. So what we kind of lean more towards then is running a coarser roller, like the black. I know a lot of people in the John Deere, they run the yellow, but if we can, if we can run that slow RPM, we like to run the black, and that just gives, because of the size of the seed, it fits better there, and so that's kind of what we're what we would prefer, but we realize not everyone has a hydraulic drive.
With the hydraulic drive, we're turning our meters like at 1.5 RPM, which you cannot do with a ground drive transmission. So we're getting really, really slow rates out of them, and it's nice and steady, and just work really good for this application.
Okay, so kind of what we've put down here is some of our recommendations is, okay, let's see here. We were, a lot of the testing that we were doing was using, size 4 primarily, but we've ran, a lot of different sizes through our rollers, but we tend to recommend, upping our population maybe from, let's see here, am I on the right page here, Craig, that shows that? Oh, here we go. I guess we'll go back to that other one. Yeah, so we're upping our pop just a little bit with the planter. If that's kind of what we tell guys. We are more of the solid seeded type, especially with that roller. Trying to get the best, head size. Having it as equal as possible, but still yet. So we try and do everything in solid seeded if we can. At least in our areas.
That's what with my single disc grill, we can do 7.5 or 15. customers have a choice, and everyone that we seed sunflowers on takes me up on the 7.5-inch spacing. We're using 15 on the canola and 7.5 on the soybeans, on the sunflowers. And I ask them why, and they want early canopy for weed control. We're all conventional tillage in the Red River Valley, so they just want a early canopy, and they feel like we're getting that with the 7.5-inch spacing.
And 10. But that's kind of what we, what we have here as, this has been some feedback from some of our customers, and this is also kind of the way that, we prefer. So that's, we wrote down there, but yeah, it's the early, crop canopy, or getting that as soon as we can.
You want to go back to that?
Yeah, why don't we?
So last year, I was out of the office for this, but Nuseed came and they had some pelleted size 5 seed that was built up, and we ran it through our test meter, which is over there, to determine seed breakage and stuff. And right now in that meter, we have 6 different combinations of rollers. 2 of them are the factory, and then the other ones are combinations of our products. We're running our breakout session, but when Nuseed was at the shop last winter, we did have one combination that they actually approved to be used with this built-up seed, if I remember right. Jed was there helping us with that, I guess.
Yeah, that was what we found was, there was the instance where we took, we were running a factory John Deere setup, and we took the seed tip breakage from 7%. Okay, right here, 3 to 5%, and we took it down to or less than 1%. So we were real, that was, we were happy with that.
That's all I got.
Yeah, I guess that kind of covers what we wanted to talk about here. And I guess we'll, we'd like everyone to, ask questions and visit with us at our breakout session.
And for the breakout, we do have, so you can put your hands on, we have examples of all our meters. And like I said, we have the factory. If you do plant sunflowers with the John Deere air drill, we would have, in our stand over there, we have a factory meter. We have a black roller with a yellow insert. We have a yellow roller with a yellow insert, and then we have some of our continue rate rollers with sunflower inserts that we can run with size 4 and 3 seed, so you can see what the performance would be coming out of the meter.
Are there any questions?
So for those guys who don't have the hydraulic drive, and they're using the yellow or the white, what kind of RPM are you running on that?
Okay, so
typically out of a ground drive transmission on a 1910 cart, it's going to get very frustrated at anything under 10 RPM. So then you're going to have to use tuning rings, which I despise tuning rings with a passion. So that's where you're going to probably be, is in that 10 RPM range to keep your monitor happy. Well, with the continue rate, it would still be, you would still run the same.
The capacity is the same?
Our capacity, yeah, and the roller is the same. All we did is they have a slight twist, so they're not pausing and dumping and pausing. They're continually dumping seed out nice and even.
We do have our white roller. We'll talk about that at a breakout session. But that is half of the capacity of John Deere's, their low rate. We call that it's a very low rate, but that is something for the like a number 4 that would be fine. But if we get into larger seed than that, we'd probably stay away from that.
The white is more of a canola, millet, radishes, clover, the small seeds, and I mean we can plant 2.5 pounds of canola if you want with that thing.
We get the error code stating that our transmission is running too slow is what comes up. Okay, well, if no one else has any questions for us right now, or if you think of anything, just ask us at our booth there. Thanks, Alison.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. One of the great parts about sunflowers is that there are opportunities to plant with both air seeders and planters. Obviously benefits and negatives to both, and there's not going to be a one size fits all for each operation. And sometimes some farms utilize both to cover more ground during planting time. So we always like to bring both sides of the fence because we know sunflowers get planted both ways. And so that's why for our last presenter today, I'm happy to introduce Jed Wall. Jed is a field sales lead for Nuseed, covering parts of the Dakotas, High Plains, and Texas, and now serves on the board of directors for the National Sunflower Association. With over 26 years of experience in the sunflower industry, Jed has experience in all facets of the sunflower and sunflower processing industries, from R&D to production fields to sales. Well known to growers and processors alike, Jed uses his experience to help growers maximize yield and opportunity for their flowers. Whenever there's a question in the spring, growers having an issue planting and has questions, we always refer them to Jed. And he's experienced a lot through his career, and that's why we asked him to help bring forward that knowledge to you all today. So, Jed, thank you for being here.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for coming again today. A lot of you traveled a long way, so it's fun to see a lot of faces we don't get to see every day, but I appreciate everybody making it in to visit us today. I'm going to start off by talking about some real general planter tips and tricks to make things go better. I don't want to offend anybody. My first pictures are of a John Deere, so I'm not biased. Don't get offended by that. We will move into each individual unit and talk one-on-one with some demos on some tips, and just some good practices for each unit and each type. So one of the first things we want to do when we're setting up the planter is to make sure that the planter is level from front to back, left to right, and the parallel bars are actually parallel. So we had the convenience of having a nice heated shop to dial this planter in, get totally folded out, and start looking over things. So one of the first things we want to take a look at is to make sure that our parallel bars are actually parallel, and that we are true to the world with level on our planter boxes, our herbicide boxes, and that everything is in working order for trash whippers, closing wheels, and packing wheels. So the next big step is to make sure that each row unit is uniform. And the easiest way that I've been taught to do this is to take, this is the simplest thing you can do, lift your planter up, take a 2x4, cut it into chunks, put the chunks underneath the gauge wheels, and then what we do is we set the planter back down, and we mark on each row unit what 1.5 inches is. So we use the 2x4, that gives us a true 1.5 inches, and then we mark on the planter our 1.5 inches. So this gives us a reference point for the rest of the year. I'm not saying we're going to plant at 1.5 inches. Some guys will use 2-inch blocks. Totally up to you however you want to do it, but it's a nice tool to do it. In the field, we've seen even brand new planters that will have anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch variance from row to row. So that's not what we want. That's not ideal. That gives us ununiform emergence and can lead to a bunch of other problems. So it's a real simple step to start off square and straight and start well. So the next thing we want to do is check our air pressure on our drive wheels daily. Equal pressure keeps the drive wheels and the toolbar, keeps the toolbar level and parallel to the ground, and it keeps everything moving at a constant rate. We want to also check the closing wheel alignment. And then the last thing we want to check is our disc opener. A new opener is 15 inches, and if it's worn past 14.5, we can cause a W in the trench, and we can cause some difference up to 3/4 of an inch for seed placement. So a couple are just homework deals and things to check over. We want to make sure all of our drives are in good working order, our chains, bearings, and sprockets, and shafts, and also make sure the chains and sprockets are properly lined to ensure nothing is binding or going to cause us some issues with breakage later. We want to make sure that all of our seed tubes and sensors are clean and functional. And in some cases, we want to make sure we have the correct seed tubes, especially in John Deere planters. We'll be moving to some of the bigger seed types. We'll have some bridging issues with the standard seed tube. So John Deere, it's not very well known, but they do actually manufacture a large curved seed tube, which helps us flow better for all sunflowers, but it especially is good for confections so we don't bridge and end up getting locked up. Again, we want to make sure our trash whippers are properly set and maintained correctly. If they're not working correctly, they can do more damage than good. We can drag trash into the furrow and just make a whole mess of problems. So we're going to start off by talking about the John Deere ProMax 40 planter. That's what we're actually going to do our demo on today. So our demo, we're going to have set up later as you come through the breakthroughs. We're going to give you a little taste of what we do on the planter stand and kind of show you all the working mechanisms. We actually have got it set up wrong. So it's going to be kind of our prize for the day is to guess what we're doing wrong. It's set within an acceptable level for planting, but we're actually doing some damage to the seed. And the prize winner will get a $100 gift card for guessing what we're doing wrong. So we'll move into that, we'll get that, but we're going to move into that on the planter stand. So with the ProMax, we want to check all the plates, and I apologize, some of this is repetitious, some of these things go back and forth from both planters, but there's a few different changes from each one. So just bear with me on it. We want to check the plates for warpage and make sure all of our plates are straight and they're tracking true and there's no issues with wear on them. In our off season with our plates, we always want to store them vertically so we don't have any warpage over the winter months. And we've seen this in the past where we'll be testing units and everything will be going fine. A guy will bring plates that were stored in a bucket or stored crooked or on a counter or something, and we'll run into some real big skips and we'll see it wobble and have some issues with breakage and other things. We want to make sure that the double eliminator is not worn out. In some of the older John Deere Max Emergers, they didn't have the double eliminator. It's a cheap tool. It's $67 for a 2-pack at John Deere. It takes about 5 minutes a row unit to put on. It not only helps you plant the size 4 seed better, but it'll do a better job on your 2s and 3s, and it also will help on other crops as well. I want to make sure that the knockout wheel turns freely. And this is one thing that some people miss. Sometimes we'll have a 30-cell plate or 40-cell plate or a different cell plate, and we'll have the wrong knockout wheel. And the role of the knockout wheel in the John Deere is to knock out chunks of broken seed or seed treatment, something along that line. If we don't have the right knockout wheel, we're going to be skipping holes, so we're not going to be doing an effective job with it. We want to make sure the door gasket has no cracks and it's properly installed. If we have cracks or if we have a crease in the gasket, it's going to purge air, so it's going to cause one unit to suck more air, and we're going to have no seeds placed or doubles because it's going to fluctuate on that unit. We want to check all of our brushes for wear. We want to make sure that our bearings in each unit move freely and do not wobble on the shaft, and they turn freely. Just a few tips for the John Deere. We mentioned this one already. Invest in the double eliminator kit. They come from John Deere. The low cost one costs $26.96 per unit, and that's one I've got with. That is right here, and we'll share it with the group as we go. It's just a real simple step down. All it does is covers part of the plate where the air picks up. It rotates the seat across, knocks your doubles off, and helps you do a better job. Takes, we did quite a few of it. Probably takes less than 20 minutes a unit to put those on. Be willing to invest in different plates. We find when we do our planter testing, it's not always the sunflower plate that does the best job. Sometimes we're using sorghum plates for very small seed, and in most occurrences with oil sunflower, we're using a small sweet corn. So as I mentioned, the small sweet corn is part number A52390. That's our most popular plate for oil sunflower. It works the best in probably about 70% of the cases we go. Or in some cases, we'll use the sunflower plate. With confections, the best plate we've used is the A52390 plate. And in some occurrences with this one of the tricks that we like to do with this is we will block every other hole and then double our population. That just makes it so we've got more uniform surface. It spins a little bit faster. Seems like we do a better job of knocking off our multiples and moving through it. Again, with the confections, we want to use large curved seed tube. And then we want to pay attention, and this is with all meters, all units, when you're working in front of, whether it's a planter stand, if you're set up in the yard, just running a test in the yard, take a look at your seed as it goes through the planter. There's times that we won't hear it from the tractor cab, but when we're standing next to the stand, you'll hear almost like a popcorn popper. And what's happening is we've got either a penny oil or smaller confection that we're used to that's making its way all the way through the plate, and we're shearing it off as we go. That's a dead seed. So it's one thing that a guy really needs to pay attention to as you're going and getting ready for the field. So with the case early riser, like I said, some of these things are the same. We want to check, first of all, our plates to make sure they're not worn out. The case is probably the easiest to check to see if we're not worn out. The case has a groove in the face, which is different than all other planters. Precision has a wear bar, and we have to mic the Pro Max plates. Very easy to check and see if our plate is worn out. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the case planter is those plates are mated to the face of the planter. So when we have our planter face, this is actually mated to the plate. So in theory, if you read the fine lines of the case book, you're supposed to have individual plates for individual covers. Not many people do it. We've tried to replicate some issues on the planter stand. I personally haven't seen them, but it's one of the things that's in the book that we point out. Again, make sure you store your plates vertically when they're not in use to keep them from warping. Check all the brushes for wear. Check our singulator for wear. Make sure our bearings spin freely and the unit doesn't wobble. And then with the case, we find that the 2440 plate works best for size 2 and size 3 seed. With the 4s, we'd like to use the 2423 for about 80% of the time. And then with confections, we use the 2455. So just like to throw a few real life situations and things that we've seen in the past. We had an occurrence here about 5 years ago that we had a grower that was finding the same hybrid, confection hybrid, and he had the same hybrid, same lot, 2 different seed sizes with the case planter. And he finished with the small seed lot, and we had a emergence concern with the grower and couldn't figure it out. He used the 2455 plate. We found seeds in the furrow, couldn't figure it out. And the only reason we figured it out is we took it back to the plantability stand, ran the exact same way he was running in the field, and we're noticing breakage. So took it back to germ test, we were killing the seeds. So it's one thing you got to be mindful when you're switching hybrids, switching seed sizes to make sure that you've got the right plate and you're taking the time so we're not damaging the seed. Case has a 7 position eliminator. It's 3 rolling wheels that roll across the plate, similar to what the John Deere does. We find in most cases running in the 2 setting is kind of our sweet spot with the cases. With the case, with the plate being bigger, I don't know if it's centrifugal force, but it seems like with the case, they always run better at higher speeds. So don't be afraid to take the speed up if you're running a case to help eliminate doubles, and it just seems to do a better job. That. So with the ESET planter, ESET is probably one of the most popular ones where I'm at for what guys are using. The ESET planter has a very, very beefy plate. They very seldomly wear out. They have a wear strip on the back that if you want to take a look later when you're up closer. Very seldomly wear out, very seldomly warp, but we still want to be mindful of them when we're using them to make sure we're storing plates correctly. Also want to make sure all of our bearings are in good shape and do not wobble. With the precision, we will also continue to check our brushes to make sure they're not wore out. One of the big things the brushes do is they help us knock off doubles and keep us doing a good job. They are a wear part. I know a lot of guys will have issues with doubles, and you look at some of the brushes and they're totally worn out. With the ESET, we have a bit of a different singulator which replaces our double eliminator. With sunflower, you always want to have it in the floating position, and most of the time we use a corn singulator. There are some specialty singulators that we've tried. We continue to go back to corn on it. It's just been the best singulator to knock off doubles and keep us from having a lot of misses. One thing with the ESET is we want to make sure the paper clip is intact, and I would show it to you. It's very small. It rides against the plate to help us knock off doubles, and we want to make sure that it's down in most applications, so we're knocking the doubles off with the paper clip. We always use the specialty extractor, and that just rides on the plate, much like the pinwheel and the John Deere. It's just knocking any foreign pieces of seed or seed treatment out so you're not plugging the plate. We always want to check the butterfly drive to make sure it's got tension on it. They do wear out, and that's one thing that sometimes we get missed. It'll give us some chop in the planter units as we're starting to wear out, so it's one thing we always want to take a look at. So a few tips for the E-set. When planting fours, we can usually add 2 to 3% of planting accuracy when we add the specialty hose. And all the specialty hose is just a piece of fuel line that's about that long. It slides over the one wire of the paper clip, and it just gives it a little more surface to knock doubles off of size 4s. You can buy them from Precision Planting. A lot of guys buy them. It's a $2 part. They'll buy one, go to your local hardware store, cut your own hose and save yourself a couple bucks. But it's very helpful to help knock off doubles when we're planting size 4s. One real watch out when we're planting pelleted seed, coated seed, encapsulated seed is we never want to have the paper clip in contact with the plate when we're planting. About 3 years ago, I had a grower call. It was late in the evening, 8, 9 o'clock, and I don't think there's anything more irritable than a farmer that's got 150 acres left to plant, rain's coming in and something isn't working. And he goes, "You lied to me, these pro size, they don't plant 80%, it's not working." And we started going through step by step, what are we doing? And I asked him where the paper clip, well, it's engaged. So went through, changed everything, didn't hear anything the rest of the evening, thought no news is good news. Went to the planter stand in the morning, set up exactly both ways and saw the breakage, and they had the guts to call back at about 10, and sure enough, that's all it was. So sometimes it's a real simple thing that throws us, but we just want to make sure that if you are using, whether it's ours or anybody else's, do not have the paper clip engaged because it will destroy the seed. Just a few other tips, tricks, our main picks for our plates. With an E-set, we like to use a 720030 for size 4s. Sometimes we'll use a 3-1, but in most applications, the 30 is our go-to plate for size 4s. It does a very nice job in combination with the paper clip with the rubber hose on it to get our plantabilities on that unit well over 97%. With our size 3s, we like to use a 720031. That's pretty much standard for 3s. With 2s, it's a 70032. Sometimes, probably 20% of the time, we will go back to the 3-1 plate. And that's in the case if we have some real penny size 2s that we need to go back to that one because they will poke through the holes. With confections, we're typically using the 72003 plate, and some of our con oil lines, the bigger, plumper con oils, size 2 con oils, we do need to go to that plate to accurately plant them. With the V-set is kind of a new planter. The last 2 years, we've really kind of started to dive into these and use these more and more. It's a nice little planter to run. It does a very nice job. There's just a few things that we've picked up on it as we go. It's different than a lot of other planters. We have a very small plate and a very robust plate. This plate is almost impossible to wear out. Very, very good quality. The one thing we really want to watch on them is to make sure we have our teeth in good shape all the way around the outside. If we have broken teeth, we'll have chatter and we'll have skips, and it can be a real pain. The unit itself is very simple. It's a real small unit. Let's go forward here. One thing we want to make sure we're doing with this unit, though, is we're putting on fresh graphite. It kind of seems like the graphite is the lifeblood of these units, so make sure you're using graphite before each crop and starting in the new year. We want to make sure the bearings, our housing is right here, that they turn freely and do not wobble. Check all brushes, and this is one thing I see a lot of guys miss on this planter. We have 2 sets of brushes on it. This is our main brush, and this is where most of our seed contact happens. And it wears out a lot quicker than the guy realizes, and we'll get them into the shop, and we'll be wore down all the way to the plastic housing. So we've effectively quit getting our doubles off, and it's basically not doing anything at that point, and we're starting to damage our unit. The seal in this one, if you want to come up later, this is a good example. I brought this one with because we were working on the planter before it came down here. The seal's actually ripped, and we were throwing about a 10% difference on this unit. It's very hard to see with the naked eye, but replacing unit, putting a different unit on, we're able to get it back up to where everything else was at. So a lot of little things on the unit that you really just kind of have to pay close attention to. We want to make sure on this one that our singulator is in good working order and is floating. So the singulator in this has two options. One is floating and one is rigid. So with sunflowers, we always run it in floating. That makes the unit run across the plate correctly and take our doubles off. When we're doing our preemptive checks on these planters, and if we're checking in the yard, this is an electrically driven motor on these, and it'll throw a yellow code on the unit. If we're not drawing proper ampage, that's going to give us a real good idea that the motor is about to fail. These motors are pretty bulletproof. Very seldomly do we have issues with them. The only real issue I've ever had working with the VSET with a grower is there was a miscommunication on a farm where father-son deal. The son thought his dad had changed the planters out. He didn't, and he was running corn, went to oil sunflower, ended up blowing out about 2 drives before he figured out he had the wrong plates in. So basically, shooting for a 22,000 stand, we were at about 4,000. It just basically ground everything up and blew the drives out and had to start over. So again, use the specialty extractor. And just a couple of our plate recommendations for this one. With our VSET, we want to use on size 4s, 73081s for our 4s, and that's true about 95% of the time. Also, with the 3s, we want to use the 730081 plate, and then on our 2s, we go to the 72083 plate. And we always want to make sure that we're using the corn singulator with sunflower. So the white air is one that we get a lot of questions on. It's very, very difficult to test on the planter stand and get a lot of great recommendations. A lot of the things I've learned about the white, I've learned from the growers over the years. They've did a wonderful job teaching me a few tips and tricks on the white air. One thing that's different of white air is the way we deliver the seed to the plate. We're blowing the seed into the plate, where with all the other planters we've talked about, it's a vacuum system. So we're sucking up against the plate. So it's a totally different way of doing things. But we can do a very good job planting sunflower with it if we've got everything set right. So again, with the white's got a really robust plate. We check them for wear and warpage. They very seldomly warp or anything. It seems like what happens with the white is somebody will drop them on the concrete and they'll break. But usually don't ever have to have them worn out. So one of the most key parts of the white planter is the shims. So even from the factory, we've seen some of these units, and this is an older unit. The main housing bearing will come from the factory, either pressed in 1/8 of an inch too deep or be sticking out 1/8 of an inch too far. In the case of it being stuck out too far, what we're going to do is we're going to have a gap in our plate, and we're going to have doubles, and it's going to cause seed breakage, and we're going to have an absolute mess. If it's pressed too far in, we want to use a micrometer so we can put the proper amount of shims in it so everything runs true to everything else. A real simple step that can save you a lot of headache with the white going forward. We want to check our brushes for wear, and with the white, the brushes are really simple. And you'd have to look at it to see. This is our standard corn brush. This is our sunflower brush. The only difference is about 1/4 inch in length, and I would say maybe 1/3 less bristles. So with the brushes, I've learned a lot from the growers on them. Some guys will use worn out corn brushes, or they'll actually take a barber scissors and trim them to make them touch the seed left. The goal of the brush in the white is to knock the doubles off. So it all depends on how aggressive we want to get. So with that, one of the things I just kind of want to point out on the white is a little trick that we've learned over the years. So on the white housing, there's no adjustment on the brushes. There's 2 bolts that hold them in, and that's it. So what we've done in the past is we'll remove the top bolt and we move the brush accordingly. So if we want to be more aggressive and knock more doubles off, we move it up. And if we want to be less aggressive and knock less seeds off or less air pressure, we move it down. 1 bolt, bolt it back tight. I guarantee you it won't go anywhere. So the one main thing with the white planter is about 3 years ago, White came out with a sunflower plate that was designated for sunflower only. It was a massive improvement to what they've had in the past. The best advice I can give you at the White is to invest in the sunflower plate. It's a really, really nice plate. It does a very good job. Sometimes when we use 4s, we still have to go back to the old popcorn plate. just because with the smaller seed size, the new sunflower plate doesn't do as well of a job. As I mentioned, use the sunflower brush. It's a good investment, part number 700730684. And like I mentioned, unbolting the back brush, move the brush up to eliminate doubles, move it down to eliminate skips. With the air pressure on the white, what we found with oilseed sunflowers, the sweet spot's anywhere from 0.9 to 1.2 pounds. And as we mentioned, we only like to run about 8 pounds if we have a center fill planter. And the reason we only want to run 8 pounds on sunflower, I know people are used to running about 20 pounds on corn, but with the white, we only want to run about 8 pounds because we got to remember that's a positive air force going into the plate. So if we put too much air to the unit, we can get too much air to the plate. So the problem is we'll pick up a huge amount of doubles and we'll pack plates full of crap. It's a bad thing. So my advice is run that air as low as you can to have proper flowability so the unit can do the unit's job off its own pressure. So last but not least, I know we have a few guys that are still using the John Deere finger pickups. The unit here that we've got today, I have installed in it right now, is our standard corn finger. So there's a couple different things that we'll talk about with this one. We want to make sure that we've got the proper fingers in this unit as we go forward. For size 2s, we can usually get away with corn fingers. For size 4s and 3s, we'd like to use the sunflower fingers, which is the short flag, if you haven't seen those before, available at any John Deere. When we get to going on the John Deere finger planter, we want to disassemble it and check the main bearing. We want to check the finger assembly for rust, wear, broken springs, things that are aligned and the main bushing is not worn out. We want to bead blast the housing and straighten if necessary. Coat the inside belt with graphite. And then reinstall or replace the belt, either bushing and drive sprocket. Align the belt. Replace the brush, and it's a real small brush in the John Deere. Comes right by the drop tube right here. It is something that wears out, not annually, but pretty close to it. And then lastly, we want to install the finger nut and make sure it's properly torqued. Reinstall our housing cover, lubricate and install the lock, and then we mark the row unit so we get it back to the proper place on the planter. A few tips with this one. As I mentioned, spend the money. This is the best money you can spend on a finger planter as far as I'm concerned. Buy the actual sunflower finger. Not only does it make 4s plant, it makes 3s and 2s plant better. It'll pay for itself. And if you can go from a 2 to a 4, you're getting another 25,000 kernels for free. Pretty easy to pay for this little guy here. And as some of the finger planters are falling out of favor, there's lots of people that'll buy somebody's used units and they'll have one set of units for flowers, one for corn, so you're not going through the work of taking them out. Like I said, this assembly is $121 a unit, part number AA3162, readily available at all John Deeres. So just a couple tips beyond the planter. We want to make sure when we're planting, we're not planting into soils below 50 degrees. We can send seed into shock, which will bring in dormancy. And with dormancy, we can get delayed germination, and we can have some real nasty, ununiform emergences, and it's a real bad deal. So make sure you're 50 or better, and that test is taken at your chosen seed depth. Percent emergence will decrease as planting depth is increased, especially in smaller seeds. So the smaller of any seed goes, the deeper we go, the more issues we're going to have with emergence, so being mindful of that as well. So for sunflower, it's extremely, extremely important that we have good seed to soil contact. So if we don't, the moisture won't penetrate the woody hull of the sunflower. We'll have uneven emergence, and it's just a bad deal. So we want to make sure that the soil is pressed firmly against the seed, and we've got good furrow closing and good seed placement. Just a little bit, and we'll get into this more when we get to the stand, just a little bit about our sunflower plantability trials. We've started the trials in 2015, and the main reason we started the trials is we wanted to be able to give our growers some better answers to go to the field with when they're planting sunflower. There's not a lot of research dollars at any one manufacturer that gets spent on sunflowers. A lot of the resources go to main crops like corn and soybeans. So our goal is to fill the void. Our goal is to send the growers to the field with some real basic recommendations for vacuum, plate, double emitter settings, and if there's any real significant watchouts in any one of our hybrids. To date, we've completed more than 4,600 tests on the planter stand to help get through this. Every year we test all of our Nuseed hybrids. So every hybrid, every seed size, and every lot number, we run through the planter stand to give an accurate recommendation for planting. So the data is gathered up, and what we do is we save one test, our best test from each unit and each trial. So we'll run a series of different tests at different miles per hour, and we will post our best test with the best settings. We won't leave a hybrid until we get over 97%. So a lot of guys settle for less. We don't. We try to get the best recommendations possible for the growers. So our main goal is to recommend the plates, limiter, vacuum, and ground speed. Currently, we're testing John Deere Pro Max, Case Relay Riser, Precision E-Set, and Precision V-Set. We do, in some cases, if we've got some guys that ask for it, we would do a little bit of white testing as well, but it's usually just those main four. Another thing it gives us a chance to do is it gives us a chance to inspect the sample after it leaves the planter stand. And you'll hear it today when you stand next to the planter stand, you can hear seeds break and you can hear things you normally can't hear from inside the tractor cab. We visually inspect the seed after we run it to make sure there is no breakage and make notes accordingly. So some of our future goals for the sunflower plantability tests, and this is one of my biggest personal goals, is we'd like to release an app that gives the growers the opportunity to enter their hybrid, their planter type, and their lot number. And it'll give you on your smartphone just a readout of back settings, plate type, limiter settings, any notes so you're not going through 15 papers trying to find one application. So it's in the works. We're starting to work with a few different people to get it put together. I can guarantee it won't be ready for this spring, but I'm hoping 2024 we'll have something out as a trial run. So another thing that we're beginning to work on is to test the new John Deere MaxEmerge 5E. That's the new high speed, the bowl type planter. The reason we're not testing it yet is all of our other planters mount 90 degrees on the toolbar, whereas the new John Deere is electrically driven and it mounts at a 45 degree, so we can't mount it to a standard tester. The only way we've been able to test it so far is you can run it with an iPad next to the planter and do your tests there, but it's pretty cumbersome, not very user-friendly. So we're waiting for Precision or somebody else to come up with a stand that is more user-friendly to go forward with this. It's a good planter. I'm looking forward to working with it. It does a nice job. It's just, we're just not there yet. Oops. For some reason, I'm not advancing here. Apologize here. Better straighten out. So in closing, this is kind of my David Letterman's top 10 list, tips for planting sunflower. Take advantage of your off season. It's a lot easier to be frustrated in the middle of winter and inside of a heated shop than it is the first week of June when everything's coming down on you. So take time to spend some time with your local guy. I'm not saying I'm not here as a precision salesman. Take a meter or two if that's what you want to do. Take your hybrids with you, take them in, run them, and get a good jumping off point so you're comfortable with what you're going to be doing in the springtime. Make sure you're willing to get out and dig for seeds. Check for seed placement, depth, and furrow closure. Be willing to switch plates, baffle settings, and limiter settings to make the planter perform at its absolute best. And just some real simple things, and we'll see it when we're on the planter stand. If you're having a lot of multiples, lower your vacuum. If you're having a lot of skips, increase your vacuum. If you have your vacuum set properly, the way we know we're about as good as we're going to get is if our skips and multiples are about the same. So when we run a 500 unit test, if we're 2 multiples, 2 skips, that's about as good as you're going to get it. Be flexible speeds, as I mentioned. Some planters run better at high speeds, some run better at low speeds. And then lastly, with this slide, use a lubricant. We prefer Dust, which is a soy-based product, and a lot of our distributors that are here today sell Dust. It's made out of soybeans. We've noticed in our plantability testing that we picked up about 1% to 1.5% of plantability, switching from our traditional 80-20 mix to the dust product. It works great. It's very user-friendly. Love working with the product. Sometimes it helps to run with planter box half full, and this is especially true in confections. It'll help us reduce bridging and also planting against the grain if we're having some issues with planting. To plant against the way we work the field will help us keep things flowing. And always just keep an open mind. Like I said, there's things that you would never think would work great with sunflower. Example of John Deere using a sorghum plate or something along that line. Be willing to change plates. If you see our boxes here, we probably have every plate that John Deere and Case has ever made, and we test them. So go in with an open mind. And I love the feedback from the growers, the sellers. I learn more every year from you guys than I learned from standing in front of the stand. Little tips and tricks are great. If you know things, pass them on to me. We'd love to share them with the group. So with that, I'm open for some questions, and I'll be around for the rest of the day and in front of the stand testing as well.
Are there any questions for Jed? You've either answered all their questions or you've stumped them even more, Jed. Yeah. Well, thank you for being a speaker today, Jed. All right. So this portion does conclude the online and the formal presentation part of Sunflower U. There is the QR code for those that are online that you can go ahead and get your CEU credits. I'd like to thank all of our presenters today and all the time that you put into the presentations, and also all the help from the Nuseed staff as well. It was certainly a team effort. There's going to be 2 ways to win a couple of gift cards. You guys will be receiving a short survey after this event, and we would appreciate that you guys give us some feedback, and then you could be qualified to win. Also, if you post anything on social media, the hashtag Nuseed Sunflower U as well.